Hey there, tonight we're exploring the ancient Greek wilderness, where hunting wasn't just a skill, but a rite of passage. What you're about to discover reveals how this primal pursuit wove together survival, sport, and even sacred ritual. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. The morning sun peeks through your window, tickling you awake in ancient Greece. Another day, another drachma, or at least the hope of it, as you prepare for a day of hunting. Spoiler alert. This is no heroic Homeric epic with guards and glory. It's more like a day job, but with a lot more dirt and the occasional wild boar charge. Let's talk gear. Before you strut out the door like some kind of mythological hero, you need to equip yourself. This isn't a casual stroll to the agora. It's a financial commitment. A decent bow alone could set you back about 3 drachmas. That's not chump change when you consider that a skilled laborer might pull in just 1 drachma a day. And if you're eyeing the premium stuff, say, a finely crafted Scythian bow made from layers of wood and horn, you're looking at an investment that could rival a couple of goats. And goats, my friend, are like the Bitcoin of ancient Greece, valuable and a bit unpredictable. Now, arrows. You don't just grab a few sticks and think you're ready to play Artemis. Each arrow is a mini work of art. The shafts are typically made from light, straight woods like reed or dogwood, and then there's the fletching. Goose feathers are the goda for your average hunter, but if you're feeling fancy, eagle feathers can be procured, though probably more for bragging rights than practicality. Let's not forget the arrowheads, crafted from bronze or iron. These aren't just sharp objects. They're a testament to the blacksmith skill, each one painstakingly hammered and shaped to perfection. The cost of a single, well-made arrow, roughly 1 arbal, or 1/6 of a drachma. Stock up on a dozen, and you're already spending 2 days' wages. The logistics of hunting don't end at your equipment. Let's talk about your trusty hound, because what's a hunt without a dog to do? Well, dogging. A well-trained hunting dog is worth its weight in salt, literally. The Spartans, famous for their rigorous lifestyle and questionable child-rearing practices, also excelled in breeding hounds. Owning a good dog could cost you anywhere from 5 to 10 drachmas. But hey, it's not just about chasing rabbits. A dog is as much a companion as a tool. We're talking about a complex relationship that predates Instagram's #dogsoft Greece by a few millennia. Now, before you head out, let's do a quick inventory check. You've got your bow, your arrows, and your dog. What about clothing? Forget the flowing robes and toga fantasies. You're wearing something far more practical, a short chiton, basically an ancient Greek version of cargo shorts made from wool or linen. It's designed for freedom of movement, not fashion week. Sandals, sure, if you're sticking to the beaten path. But for the wilder terrains, barefoot is often the way to go. Call it an ancient pedicure, if you will. Speaking of paths, let's consider the economic landscape. In this era, hunting isn't just a sport for the elite, although they certainly like to think it is. It's also a necessity for many. You're not just out there to flex your archery skills, you're trying to put food on the table. And when you do land that prized stag or boar, it's not just a meal, it's a commodity. You can trade the meat, the hide, even the bones, which are perfect for crafting tools or ornaments. Hunting in ancient Greece also has a social layer. It's a communal activity that often involves friends and family, a bit like a rustic potluck with more adrenaline and fewer Pinterest boards. It's a chance to bond, share stories, and maybe even hatch a plan or two about local politics. Because, let's face it, the Greek city-states are as much about alliances and rivalries as they are about philosophy and democracy. You're not just hunting animals. You're navigating a web of social and economic interactions as intricate as any palace intrigue. As you lace up, or perhaps unlace, your sandals, you can't help but reflect on the fact that this whole hunting operation is a microcosm of Greek life. It's about balance between nature and man, necessity and luxury, individual prowess and collective effort. You're not just participating in an activity, you're engaging in a tradition that's as old as the hills you're about to trek. With your gear finally in place and your dog eager to get going, you step outside into the crisp morning air. It's time to see what the day holds. Is it a successful hunt, a hard lesson in humility, or perhaps a little bit of both. In ancient Greece, just like today, the line between myth and reality is as fine as the fletching on your arrows. But one thing's for sure, it's going to be a day worth remembering. As you step outside into the crisp morning air, you're not just heading out for a casual hike in the hills. You're stepping onto a stage where social dynamics play out as dramatically as any Greek tragedy. Hunting in ancient Greece is as much a social affair as it is a survival tactic. You're not just aiming for the heart of the beast. You're navigating a labyrinth of human interactions where allegiances are forged and rivalries simmer like a pot of lentil stew on the fire. Let's talk guest lists, shall we? Much like a modern-day exclusive club, not everyone gets an invite to these hunting escapades. It's a who's who of the local elite, and you don't just show up by accident. Invitations to these outings are as coveted as a golden apple in the garden of the Hesperides. You're rubbing shoulders, or clamidons, with the influential and the aspiring. Why? Because hunting isn't just about spearing a boar, it's about spearing opportunities in the social hierarchy. Picture the scene. A gathering of men, and occasionally women, though let's be honest, the patriarchy's got a strong grip here, who matter in your polis. There's the aristocrat who owns half the olive groves in the region, the local politician looking to boost his popularity, and the ambitious young upstart hoping to catch the eye of a potential patron. You're here too, representing your own humble household, with dreams of moving up the social ladder as tangible as the weight of your bow. As you march out of the village, the dirt path crunching underfoot, conversations swirl like the morning mist. There's talk of alliances, who's siding with whom, which city-state is cozying up to Sparta, and who's foolish enough to antagonize Athens. It's like watching a chess game unfold, except the pieces are real people with real consequences. And you're smack dab in the middle of it, a pawn or perhaps a knight if you play your cards. Air your arrows, right. Now, let's debunk a myth or two while we're at it. Romantic tales often paint these hunting parties as harmonious gatherings of noble warriors, united in their quest for glory. But here's the reality check. These outings are rife with tension and competition. Sure, there's camaraderie, but it's laced with undercurrents of rivalry. Who brings back the most impressive game? Who's the most skilled with the bow? These aren't just idle questions. They are the metrics by which reputations are measured and alliances are formed. As you leave the village behind, the landscape opens up, revealing the rolling hills and dense forests that are your hunting grounds. These lands aren't just a backdrop for your adventure. They're a battleground of their own, not just for the prey you seek, but for the power dynamics that play out among Greek city-states. The terrain itself is a symbol of the shifting alliances. Sometimes it's friendly, offering easy paths and abundant game. Other times, it's treacherous, with hidden pitfalls and hostile neighbors. Speaking of neighbors, let's not forget the delicate dance of diplomacy that happens on these hunts. Encounter a group from a rival city-state, and you've got yourself a potential powder keg. Do you share the hunting grounds amicably, or does every rustle in the bush become a reason to tighten your grip on your weapon? It's a test of wits and will, where a single misstep could lead to more than just a bruised ego. It's a game of risk and reward, with the stakes as high as the peaks of Mount Olympus. And let's address the economic elephant in the room. While the elite might treat hunting as a leisurely pastime, for many, it's a necessity. That wild boar isn't just a trophy, it's a ticket to survival. Its meat will feed your family, its hide will be traded for essentials, and its tusks can be shaped into tools or even currency in a pinch. You're not just hunting for sport, you're hunting for sustenance, for status, for a future that's not guaranteed. So, as the sun climbs higher and the chorus of cicadas fills the air, you keep your eyes peeled and your senses sharp. The hunt is on, and it's more than a pursuit of animals. It's a pursuit of opportunity, of connections, of a life that balances on the razor's edge between myth and reality. And in this ancient game of survival, every step, every decision, echoes with the weight of history and the promise of what might yet be. As the cicadas serenade you into the thick of the hunt, reality sets in faster than a Spartan on a morning jog. Your hunting party isn't just a ragtag group of spear-wielding dreamers, but a coordinated team with a plan sharper than a Corinthian helmet. Forget the solo heroics of mythic tales. This is more like ancient Greek synchronized swimming, minus the water, and with a lot more hair on the participants. First off, there's the strategy. Greek hunters weren't just wandering the woods hoping to bump into a boar by chance. Oh no, they had tactics that would make a modern-day strategist nod in approval. Typically, the group forms a semicircle, with the hunters fanning out to cover as much ground as possible. It's like setting up an ancient net, except your net is a squad of determined humans, and your fish are wild beasts with tusks that could ruin anyone's day. Now, let's talk about the silent heroes of this operation, the beaters. Armed with sticks and voices as loud as a Homeric epic, they advance through the underbrush, flushing out game towards the wading archers. It's a noisy job, but someone's got to do it. And believe me, in a world without Spotify, these guys are the closest thing to a live concert you're going to get. Their rhythmic clatter and shouts are designed not to scare you, but to drive the game in the right direction. It's all about teamwork, and these beaters are the unsung heroes who rarely get the spotlight in ancient tales. While we're on the subject of unsung heroes, let's not forget those hounds. Remember your trusty canine companion. This is where they earn their keep. Trained to perfection, these dogs are the secret weapon in the hunter's arsenal. They have an uncanny ability to track and corner prey, making them the ancient equivalent of a GPS system for animals. And let's face it, when a boar comes barreling out of the brush, it's nice to have a four-legged friend showing you where to aim. And speaking of boars, these aren't the cuddly pigs you might imagine. These guys are the ultimate boss fight of the ancient Greek wilderness, with tusks that could double as weapons of mass destruction and a temper shorter than an Athenian politician's patience. They're as dangerous as they are delicious. A successful boar hunt is a testament to skill and bravery, not just luck. It's a battle of wits, strength, and sometimes sheer luck. Because let's be honest, you never really want to be on the business end of a boar's bad day. As the hunt progresses, you might spot a deer or two. But don't be fooled by their delicate appearance. These creatures are elusive and fast. The Greeks admired their grace and speed, so taking one down is a mark of honor. Arrows fly and spears are hurled, but it's a test of patience and precision. Miss your shot, and there's no second chance. These animals have a knack for disappearing into the scrub faster than gossip at a symposium. Now, let's debunk another myth. The lone hunter. You know the type. The hero who single-handedly takes down a beast with nothing but grit and a sharp stick. In reality, hunting was a collective effort. It was less about individual glory and more about community success. Sure, tales of lone warriors make for great storytelling, but the truth is that survival often depended on collaboration and strategy. Those who hunted alone either became legends or, more likely, cautionary tales. While we're busting myths, let's tackle the romanticized idea of hunting as a noble pastime reserved for the elite. Sure, the aristocrats loved to hunt, but for many, it was a matter of survival. The meat, hides, and bones of the animals weren't just trophies. They were resources, currency in the barter economy of the time. In a way, every hunt was a microcosm of the economy, a blend of necessity and opportunity that mirrored the larger world of Greek commerce and trade. And then there's the environmental angle. Ancient hunters were keenly aware of their surroundings. They didn't just march into the woods blindly. Knowing the terrain was crucial, where the animals roamed, where the water sources were, and where the dangers lurked. It was a delicate balance, respecting the land that provided for them while also asserting their dominion over it. There's a reason the Greeks revered Artemis, goddess of the hunt and wilderness. Her domains were the lifeblood of their survival. As the day draws on and the sun begins its descent, you start to see the fruits of your labor. Maybe it's a boar slung over a shoulder or a brace of rabbits that will grace the family table. Success in the hunt isn't just measured in the number of animals brought down. It's in the stories shared, the bonds strengthened, and the knowledge gained. It's a day that ties you to your ancestors and your community, a reminder of the intricate dance between humanity and nature. So, as you make your way back to the village, weary but satisfied, you realize that this ancient practice is a testament to human ingenuity and adaptability. It's a tradition steeped in history and necessity, where the line between myth and reality blurs like the horizon at dusk. Hunting in ancient Greece was never just about the thrill of the chase. It was about survival, strategy, and the stories that would be told long after the arrows had flown and the dust had settled. And with that, the tale of the hunt continues, weaving its way through the tapestry of history like an arrow finding its mark. As you and your fellow hunters trudge back to the village, each step kicks up a small cloud of dust, a testament to a day well spent in the ancient Greek wilderness. The sun dips low, casting long shadows that stretch like myths across the landscape. With the hunt behind you, it's time to face a different kind of challenge, the division of spoils. And trust me, this is where social dynamics get as tangled as a Spartan's hair on a windy day. Ah, the spoils of the hunt, more than just a pile of game laid at the feet of the guards. It's a tangible measure of success, but also a barometer of status and power within your community. If you think it's just a matter of who gets the biggest piece of meat, think again. This is ancient Greece, where even the distribution of a wild boar becomes a masterclass in social etiquette and political maneuvering. Let's break it down. First up is the division process itself, which is more intricate than a philosopher's argument about the nature of existence. The leader of the hunt, usually someone of higher status or with a reputation for fairness, has the unenviable task of slicing up the rewards and distributing them among the participants. It's like being the host of a reality show, only without the camera crew and the promise of a cash prize at the end. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The biggest and best parts of the animal, like the prized haunches, usually go to the most influential members of the group. It's not just about appeasing hunger, it's about recognizing power. The distribution reflects the social hierarchy as clearly as a bronze mirror reflects your sunburned face. The aristocrats, the warriors, the local bigwigs, they get the juiciest cuts. Meanwhile, those lower down the pecking order might end up with less glamorous parts like the entrails. But hey, don't underestimate the value of a well-cooked liver. It can be quite the delicacy if you know what you're doing. Now, let's add an economic twist to this tale. The spoils aren't just for feasting. They're also commodities in their own right. Every piece of the animal has potential value. The meat, of course, is a staple, vital for feeding families, especially when agriculture might not always yield a bountiful harvest. The hides, they're a hot commodity for everything from clothing to trade. And those tusks, they're not just trophies. They can be carved into tools or even used as currency in a pinch. It's a barter economy where every part of the animal serves a purpose and nothing goes to waste. But let's not forget the social implications. Successfully returning with a hefty catch boosts your standing faster than an Athenian politician on election day. It's not just about physical sustenance, it's about social currency. A successful hunt can elevate you from that guy with the scruffy beard to that guy who brought back the boar, making you the talk of the agora. Your stock in the community rises, and with it, the potential for alliances, partnerships, and even marriage prospects. After all, who wouldn't want to be associated with someone who can bring home the bacon, literally? And then there's the feast. Oh, the feast. It's not just a meal. It's an event, a spectacle that rivals any modern-day gala. Picture this. Tables laden with the bounty of the hunt, wine flowing as freely as the conversation, and a chorus of laughter and storytelling that echoes into the night. The feast is a display of wealth and influence, a chance to flaunt what you've got, and maybe even throw a bit of shade at your rivals. It's like the Oscars of ancient Greece, complete with a red carpet of dirt and the finest chitarry this side of the Peloponnese. But don't be fooled by the convivial atmosphere. It's a political arena as much as a culinary one. Deals are struck over roasted meat, alliances are forged over cups of wine, and rivalries are quietly stoked beneath the surface. The feast is a microcosm of Greek society, a reminder that in a world where status is everything, every action, every word, every shared morsel can tip the balance of power. As the night deepens, the stories begin. Tales of the day's hunt are recounted with a flourish, each detail embellished with the kind of artistic license that would make even Homer raise an eyebrow. The lone hunter becomes a hero, the boar a beast of legend, the forest a labyrinth of adventure. It's a celebration of skill and bravery, yes, but also a testament to the art of storytelling, where the line between fact and fiction is as flexible as the strings of a lyre. And what about the guards? You didn't think we'd forget them, did you? Before the feast kicks off, there's a nod to the divine. A portion of the spoils is often set aside as an offering to Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, to thank her for her favor and ensure her goodwill for future endeavors. It's a reminder that no matter how skilled or lucky you are, there's always room for a little divine intervention in the unpredictable dance of life. As the evening winds down and the embers of the fire glow softly against the night, you find yourself reflecting on the day. The hunt was more than just a pursuit of prey. It was a pursuit of community, of status, of the delicate balance between survival and celebration. It's a tradition steeped in history, where every arrow loosed and every tale told becomes a thread in the rich tapestry of human experience. And so, with the stars as your witness and the stories of the hunt still echoing in your mind, you drift off to sleep, ready to face whatever challenges and opportunities tomorrow may bring. Because in ancient Greece, just as in life, the hunt is never truly over. It merely evolves, a constant reminder of the dance between myth and reality, between what we seek and what we find. As the stars blanket the sky, you ponder the day's events beneath their ancient gaze. In the world of ancient Greece, hunting is not merely a physical pursuit, but a symphony of cultural, spiritual, and mythological significance. You see, while today's hunt was about tangible rewards, meat, hides, and perhaps some neighborhood clout, there's an entire universe of meaning beneath those layers of dirt and sweat. Let's dive headfirst into the divine pool and talk about the gods. The Greeks had a knack for attributing almost every aspect of life to the whims of their deities, and hunting was no exception. Take Artemis, for instance. She wasn't just another pretty face in the pantheon. She was the poster goddess for hunters everywhere. As the eternal maiden of the wild, she embodied the untamed spirit of the hunt. And if you dared to hunt without paying homage to her, well, let's just say you'd be better off running into a boar with a hangover. But it wasn't all about appeasing the divine. Hunting rituals were deeply woven into the very fabric of Greek spirituality. Before a hunt, it was common to perform a sacrifice, often a smaller animal, as an offering to Artemis. This wasn't just about winning favor. It was a reminder of the delicate balance between man and nature. By recognizing their reliance on the wilderness, the Greeks acknowledged that hunting was a privilege, not a right. And pragmatically speaking, it was a way to hedge your bets against the unpredictable nature of the hunt. Now, let's tackle the romanticized image of the heroic hunter. We've all heard the tales of legendary figures like Heracles and his 12 labors, which included the capture of the Erymanthian boar. These stories paint a picture of grandeur and glory, where each hunter is a demigod in his own right, striding through the forest with swagger and certainty. But let's face it, folks, for every Heracles, there were countless others who returned with nothing more than a few bruises and a strong sense of humility. The reality was that hunting was often less about heroics and more about perseverance and a touch of luck. The mythologized narratives served a purpose, though they inspired and uplifted, infusing a sense of purpose into the daily grind. Economically, hunting was also a linchpin in the Greek world. Beyond the immediate sustenance it provided, the hunt was a catalyst for trade and commerce. The spoils of a successful hunt could be bartered for goods and services, a critical function in a society where currency wasn't always clinking in everyone's tunic. And let's not forget the social capital that came with it. A hunter who consistently brought back game could find himself in good standing with influential figures, potentially opening doors to opportunities otherwise closed. But here's the kicker. Hunting was also a venue for political maneuvering. Imagine a small-scale United Nations meeting, minus the translators, and with a lot more animal fur. Hunting parties often included key figures from neighboring city-states, providing a platform to negotiate alliances, settle disputes, or simply gauge the mood of rival factions. It was diplomacy by way of shared adrenaline, a way to build bridges without actually having to build bridges. Now, let's not gloss over the environmental impact. The Greeks, for all their reverence of nature, were not above exploiting it. Overhunting was a real concern, especially as populations grew and demand for resources increased. It's a tale as old as time, really. Humanity's constant tug-of-war between need and greed. The Greeks, despite their mythologized wisdom, were not immune to this struggle. They knew the importance of sustainable practices, but pressures of the time often led to choices that mirrored those of many societies throughout history. As night deepens, the stories of the hunt take on a life of their own, echoing through the agora and seeping into the very stones of the city. These tales were more than just entertainment. They were a cultural currency, a way to transmit values, lessons, and a sense of identity across generations. They elevated the mundane to the mythical, ensuring that even the most routine hunt was immortalized in the annals of human history. In wrapping up this day in the life of an ancient Greek hunter, it becomes clear that hunting was a multifaceted endeavor, a blend of survival, spirituality, economics, and mythology. It was a microcosm of Greek life, reflecting the complexities and contradictions that defined a civilization. The hunt was a dance between man and nature, a ritual that grounded the Greeks in their world while also elevating them beyond it. So, as you drift off under the celestial canopy, let the stories of the hunt linger in your mind. They're tales of grit and grace, of triumph and toil. They remind us that in the grand tapestry of history, the line between myth and reality is as thin as the string of a bow, and it's in the spaces between that we find the essence of what it means to be human. In the sun-drenched lands of late 18th century Venezuela, you could find a young Simon Bolivar learning the ropes of aristocracy. Think Downton Abbey, but with more tropical heat and less stiff upper lip. Born into a family that might as well have been the Kardashians of Caracas, Bolivar was handed a life glittering with privilege and responsibilities. His family was loaded, boasting a fortune that included sprawling estates, sugar plantations, and more enslaved laborers than one could count without a ledger. In a world where the gap between the haves and the have-nots was wider than the Orinoco River, Bolivar was definitely in the haves category, living in luxury, while most of his countrymen were stuck in the mud of colonial subjugation. But here's the kicker. Young Simon had dreams that didn't quite match his opulent reality, despite being born with a silver spoon in his mouth, or perhaps because of it. His mind was a bubbling cauldron of revolutionary ideas. He was the kind of kid who'd read Rousseau under the shade of a mango tree, contemplating liberty while sipping on the finest imported wine. This paradox would shape his entire life. He was a wealthy man dreaming of equality, a bit like a billionaire suddenly deciding they'd rather be a monk. Now, let's talk about his European escapades. At the tender age of 16, Bolivar was sent off to the continent to polish his manners, and maybe learn a thing or two from the Enlightenment thinkers. Paris, of course, was his playground. He soaked up the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity like a sponge, though the French Revolution's bloody aftermath might have made him think twice about the whole liberty thing. Imagine a teenage Bolivar, wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, rubbing shoulders with intellectual heavyweights. It's like sending a teenager today to Silicon Valley and expecting them not to come back wanting to start a tech revolution. During his European tour, Bolivar witnessed firsthand the seismic shifts in power and politics. In Spain, he mingled with the upper crust, but also kept a keen eye on the local populace's grumblings about monarchy, a lesson in the potent power of dissent. This was a guy who saw Napoleon crown himself emperor and thought, I could do better. And let's not forget his infamous vow in Rome, where he swore on Mont Sacro to never rest until South America was free. Dramatic. Yes. Iconic. Absolutely. But let's dial back to the fiscal realities of Bolivar's homeland, because it wasn't all just philosophical musings and grand gestures. The economic structure in South America was as twisted as a telenovela plot. The colonies were cash cows for Spain, and the wealth was sucked dry by the crown faster than you could say mercantilism. The local elite, including the Bolivar family, benefited from this system, but also chafed under its constraints. It was this uneasy mix of privilege and oppression that set the stage for Bolivar's revolutionary aspirations. Back in Venezuela, the Bolivar estate was like an economic microcosm. Managing a fortune in the 18th century wasn't just about enjoying the finer things, though there was plenty of that. It was about dealing with the constant threat of economic instability. The family's wealth was tied to the volatile market of cacao and sugar, commodities that were as fickle as a Spanish telenovela star. One bad harvest or a shift in European tastes, and the family fortune could take a nosedive faster than a Venezuelan thunderstorm during rainy season. In this world, Bolivar learned the hard truths about wealth and power. He understood that the Spanish crown's greed often left the local elite in a precarious position, beholden to distant rulers who couldn't care less about the day-to-day lives of their subjects. It's the kind of dynamic that would make any self-respecting aristocrat want to toss their powdered wig into the revolutionary ring. So, there we have it. A young Simon Bolivar, shaped by the contradictions of his upbringing and the revolutionary fervor of Europe, poised to become a firebrand in the fight for freedom. He was a man of paradoxes, a wealthy aristocrat with a rebel's heart, ready to set the world ablaze. And it all started in those early years, when the seeds of revolution were sown amid the gilded halls of his Venezuelan estates and the bustling streets of Paris. A fitting start for a man who would one day be known as the Liberator. And so, with the dreams of a free South America swirling in his mind like the heady aroma of freshly brewed coffee, Simon Bolivar returned to Venezuela, ready to light the revolutionary fuse. But, as any seasoned traveler will tell you, there's often a world of difference between the romantic ideals you carry back in your luggage and the messy reality you unpack when you get home. Our dashing liberator was about to learn this the hard way, into the admirable campaign of 1813. Now, if you're thinking the name implies a smashing success, think again. It was more like naming your Chihuahua Killer, a bit of a stretch. Bolivar, armed with more enthusiasm than military experience, embarked on this daring military expedition to liberate Venezuela from Spanish rule. He began in Colombia, where he managed to rally a motley crew of soldiers and adventurers, promising them glory, freedom, and perhaps even a bit of loot on the side. But let's take a moment to appreciate the absurd logistics of 19th century warfare. Forget modern supply chains. Back then, an army's advance was as unpredictable as a soap opera plot twist. Troops traversed harsh terrains, often delayed not by the enemy, but by the stubbornness of their own beasts of burden. Picture Bolivar's army, an eclectic mix of idealists and mercenaries, trudging through the Andes, their progress impeded by llamas that seemed more interested in grazing than revolutionizing. If that doesn't paint a picture of military might, I don't know what does. When Bolivar finally crossed into Venezuela, the local response was lukewarm at best. Imagine trying to throw a surprise party for a friend who's indifferent to birthdays. The locals, weary of conflict and skeptical of yet another liberator promising change, greeted Bolivar with a mix of curiosity and caution. He was like a charismatic door-to-door salesman with a revolutionary twist, trying to convince them that freedom was just a signature away. Yet, despite the comedic missteps and logistical nightmares, Bolivar's campaign wasn't a total washout. On July 6, 1813, he entered Caracas amidst cheers and proclamations of liberation, a moment that was more about symbolic victory than strategic gain. But let's not romanticize it too much. The real work was just beginning. Bolivar's early setbacks were less about failure and more about a crash course in the harsh realities of leadership. It became glaringly clear that leading a revolution wasn't just about grand speeches and noble ideals. It was about navigating the treacherous waters of politics, managing scarce resources, and earning the trust of a populace that had seen its fair share of would-be liberators come and go. Economically, the region was a mess akin to a post-party hangover. Years of Spanish exploitation had left the Venezuelan economy as brittle as a stale arepa. The local elite, who had once profited under Spanish rule, were now caught in a strange limbo, unsure whether to back Bolivar's revolutionary fervor or cling to the old order like a security blanket. Bolivar, ever the pragmatist, realized that to win the war, he needed more than just idealism and a ragtag army. He needed to stabilize the economy and win over both the skeptical elite and the downtrodden masses. The challenge was akin to juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle. Impressive if you can pull it off, but disastrous if you falter. And here's where Bolivar's genius began to shine through. Instead of wallowing in his setbacks, he used them as fuel. Each failure was a lesson learned, each misstep a stepping stone. The man was a phoenix, rising from his own ashes with a renewed determination to succeed. His early blunders, while laughable in hindsight, laid the groundwork for his later successes by teaching him the value of adaptability and resilience. Bolivar's journey was a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure and evolve. He faced the harsh realization that revolutions aren't won overnight, and that the path to freedom is often paved with unexpected detours and stubborn llamas. But through it all, he remained steadfast, driven by a vision of a united South America free from colonial chains. As Bolivar regrouped and strategized, the seeds of his future triumph were already budding beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to bloom. And though the road ahead was fraught with challenges, he was ready to face them with the same fiery passion that had brought him this far. So, stay tuned, because this story is far from over. Our hero's journey is just beginning, and the best, or the most chaotic, depending on how you view it, is yet to come. And so, with the grit of a true underdog and the charisma of a reality TV star, Simon Bolivar was ready to turn the tide. His campaign had the kind of rough start that would make any normal person consider a career change. But Bolivar was anything but normal. He took stock of his ragtag forces, a crew that had more diversity than a United Nations meeting. Picture soldiers with mismatched uniforms, some armed with muskets, others with machetes, and a few just armed with sheer determination. Bolivar knew that if he wanted to make a comeback, he'd need more than just a pep talk and a hastily drawn battle plan. Enter the reorganization of his forces, a process that was less about military precision and more about turning chaos into something resembling order. Bolivar's strategy was simple: play the long game. Instead of focusing solely on immediate victories, he aimed to rebuild his army's morale and strength. It was a bit like trying to assemble a jigsaw puzzle with pieces from different sets. Harder than it looks, but not impossible if you're persistent. Amidst the shifting sands of alliances, Bolivar struck gold by forming unexpected partnerships. He wasn't picky about where his support came from. Patriots, former royalists, and even some opportunistic mercenaries found themselves united under Bolivar's banner. His ability to draw support from such a motley crew speaks volumes about his charisma. Bolivar had the knack for convincing people that they weren't just fighting for a cause, but for a future. And let's be honest, who could resist the allure of being on the winning side of history? Now, let's spice things up with some economic context, because revolutions aren't just fueled by idealism. They run on resources. Venezuela's economy at the time was like a shipwreck barely afloat, thanks to years of Spanish exploitation. The region was rich in potential, but poor in reality, with a reliance on agriculture and mining that left it vulnerable to global market whims. Bolivar's task was to stabilize this shaky economy, a move as delicate as juggling flaming swords while blindfolded. Yet he knew that a strong economy was crucial for winning the hearts and minds of the populace. Bolivar's approach to economic reform was pragmatic, if not downright Machiavellian. He understood that he needed the support of the local elite, the very folks who had once thrived under Spanish rule. So, he played the political game like a chess master, offering these influential figures positions of power in his new order. It was a savvy move that helped him secure financial backing and neutralize potential threats. In return, he offered them a slice of the revolutionary pie, a tantalizing prospect that many couldn't resist. But let's not sugarcoat it. Bolivar's transformation from a fumbling leader to a charismatic figure wasn't without its darker undertones. His leadership style began to shift, adopting elements of authoritarianism that would make even a dictator blush. Bolivar was determined to maintain control, and that meant making tough decisions. He wasn't afraid to consolidate power and enact policies that, while effective, skirted the edges of tyranny. His vision of a unified South America was noble, but his methods sometimes veered into the realm of the iron-fisted. This brings us to the PR wizardry of the era. Bolivar was as much a master of image as he was of strategy. He understood the power of narrative long before hashtags were trending. Through a mix of proclamations, public appearances, and well-crafted letters, he positioned himself as the embodiment of the revolutionary spirit. It was a bit like building a brand. Bolivar knew that perception mattered almost as much as reality. His supporters saw him as the liberator of the oppressed, while his detractors painted him as a power-hungry autocrat. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in between. The capture of Caracas in 1813 was both a strategic coup and a PR triumph. It was a moment that bolstered his image as the liberator of Venezuela and sent ripples of hope across the continent. But the reality was messier than the myth-making. The city's capture didn't mean instant peace or prosperity. It was just one victory in a long and grueling struggle. Bolivar's forces still faced scattered resistance, economic woes, and the ever-present threat of Spanish reinforcements. In the end, Bolivar's comeback wasn't about a single battle or a grand speech. It was about resilience and adaptability. He was a leader who learned from his mistakes and used them as stepping stones to greater heights. His journey from a fumbling idealist to a charismatic leader is a testament to the complexities of human ambition, a reminder that even the most revered figures are shaped by their flaws as much as their virtues. And with the story of Simon Bolivar, the drama is far from over. As the saying goes, the plot thickens, but in this case, it's more like a stew that's just beginning to simmer. Stay tuned, because the next chapter promises to be nothing short of revolutionary. So here we are, standing on the precipice of Bolivar's most audacious military endeavor, the crossing of the Andes. Imagine being told you're about to lead an army through one of the most unforgiving mountain ranges on the planet. It's like deciding to take a casual stroll through Mordor, but with more frostbite and less chance of running into a hobbit. The Andes are no joke, a spine of jagged peaks stretching over 300 miles, with altitudes reaching up to 841 feet. It's the kind of terrain that makes even the hardiest mountain goat reconsider its life choices. In June 1819, Bolivar faced the monumental task of leading his troops across these icy behemoths from New Granada, modern-day Colombia, into Venezuela, a trek that would test the limits of human endurance and military logistics. Picture this, an army of roughly 500 soldiers, along with horses, mules, and a smattering of local guides, embarking on a journey that was more about survival than strategy. The Andes don't exactly roll out the red carpet for travelers. They offer a more survival of the fittest welcome. Bolivar's decision to undertake this crossing wasn't just a testament to his military genius. It was an act of sheer desperation. The Spanish forces had fortified their positions in Venezuela, making a direct assault as appealing as a swim with piranhas. The Andes offered a way to outflank the enemy, albeit at the cost of risking life and limb. It was a gamble so bold that it bordered on madness, a move that screamed, "Go big or go home," with the added risk of not making it home at all. The crossing itself was an ordeal that would have made Dante's Inferno seem like a walk in the park. Soldiers trudged through snow and ice, battling hypothermia, altitude sickness, and the ever-present threat of avalanches. Supplies were scarce, and what little food was available often froze solid. The men were reduced to eating leather straps and whatever else they could scrounge up, bark, grass, maybe even the odd unfortunate llama. But here's where Bolivar's leadership shone brighter than a supernova. He was in the thick of it, sharing in the suffering and hardships of his men. This wasn't some distant general barking orders from a cozy tent. Bolivar was right there, freezing his aristocratic behind off with the rest of them. His presence was more than just symbolic. It was a lifeline, a reminder of the cause they were fighting for. In the brutal cold of the Andes, Bolivar's charisma was the warmth that kept the revolutionary flame alive. Against all odds, Bolivar's army emerged on the other side of the Andes, battered but unbroken. It was a feat that defied logic, a testament to human tenacity and the strength of collective will. This crossing wasn't just a military maneuver. It was a statement, a declaration that Bolivar and his men were willing to go to hell and back for their cause, and their efforts paid off. On August 7, 1819, Bolivar's forces achieved a decisive victory at the Battle of Boyacá in Colombia, a battle that marked a turning point in the independence struggle. This triumph wasn't just a military success. It was a morale-boosting win that galvanized his troops and sent ripples of hope throughout the continent. The Spanish were caught off guard, their supposedly unassailable positions crumbling like a house of cards in a stiff breeze. But as the dust settled and the cheers of victory faded, Bolivar faced a new set of challenges. His vision of a united Latin America, what he dreamily dubbed Gran Colombia, was beginning to look more like a patchwork quilt of competing interests. It was the geopolitical equivalent of herding cats, and Bolivar was the exhausted shepherd trying to keep everyone moving in the same direction. The irony here is thicker than molasses. Bolivar, the liberator, was becoming the very thing he'd fought against, a centralizing force trying to impose order on a collection of fiercely independent states. Gran Colombia encompassed modern-day Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama, a sprawling entity held together by little more than Bolivar's charisma and the ink of a freshly signed constitution. The economic and political realities of this massive experiment were as complex as they were daunting. Each region had its own unique set of challenges. Venezuela's economy was in tatters, Ecuador was grappling with internal strife, and Colombia was a hotbed of political dissent. It was like trying to juggle flaming torches while standing on a seesaw, with each region threatening to tip the balance. At the heart of this struggle was the battle between federalists and centralists, a debate that feels eerily familiar in today's political landscape. Bolivar's centralist inclinations put him at odds with various regional leaders who preferred a more decentralized approach. His dream of a unified Latin America was colliding with the harsh reality of regional identities and the stubbornness of local elites who were more interested in maintaining their own power than in Bolivar's grand vision. In an ironic twist, the liberator who had fought against Spanish tyranny was now perceived by some as a would-be dictator. His efforts to maintain control over Gran Colombia often led him to enact measures that were more authoritarian than democratic. It was a paradox that Bolivar struggled to reconcile: how to forge unity without imposing tyranny, how to lead without resorting to the very tactics of oppression that he had once decried. As Bolivar grappled with these challenges, the cracks in his vision began to widen. Regional leaders like José Antonio Píz in Venezuela and Juan José Flores in Ecuador started to assert their independence, chafing under Bolivar's centralized rule. The seeds of discontent were sown, and the dream of Gran Colombia began to unravel, slowly but inexorably. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Bolivar's story isn't done yet. The liberator, ever the resilient phoenix, wasn't ready to let go of his dream without a fight. As he faced the mounting challenges of holding together his fledgling republic, Bolivar continued to adapt and strategize, determined to find a way to keep the revolutionary spirit alive. So here we leave Bolivar, balancing on the edge of triumph and turmoil, his legacy as a liberator secure, but his vision of a united continent hanging by a thread. The next chapter promises even more twists and turns, a roller coaster of ambition, power, and the eternal struggle for freedom. Stay tuned, because in the world of Simon Bolivar, the only certainty is that nothing is certain. As the empire of Gran Colombia teetered on the brink, Bolivar's unyielding resolve was both his greatest strength and most glaring flaw. Picture Bolivar, the quintessential tragic hero, still clinging to his vision of a united Latin America like a drowning man clutching a lifebuoy. But the waters of reality were cold and unforgiving, and they were rising fast. By the time the 1820s rolled around, Bolivar found himself in a situation that would make any leader's head spin faster than a roulette wheel. The dream of Gran Colombia was unraveling like a poorly knitted sweater, with threads of dissent being pulled by regional leaders eager to assert their own authority. The political landscape was a veritable minefield, and Bolivar was tiptoeing through it with the grace of a bull in a china shop. Take Venezuela, for instance. José Antonio Píz, the charismatic Anero leader, was growing increasingly disillusioned with Bolivar's centralized rule. Píz, with his cowboy charm and knack for guerrilla warfare, wasn't exactly the type to enjoy taking orders from a distant capital. He represented a powerful faction that saw Bolivar's ambitions as an encroachment on their local autonomy. The love affair between Bolivar and his countrymen was quickly becoming a bitter custody battle over the soul of the revolution. Meanwhile, Ecuador was no less tumultuous. Juan José Flores, another regional powerhouse, was starting to see more potential in independence than in Bolivar's grand continental scheme. These local leaders, armed with their own ambitions and a healthy dose of skepticism, were the cracks in Bolivar's foundation, turning his dream of unity into a precarious balancing act. Bolivar's response to these challenges was a mix of political maneuvering, military posturing, and the occasional authoritarian crackdown. His attempts to hold Gran Colombia together were as much about charisma as they were about coercion. And therein lay the rub. Bolivar, the liberator, was becoming a figure who had to impose order through measures that some might call despotic. It was a transition that was as ironic as it was inevitable. The economy, always the silent partner in any political drama, was another thorn in Bolivar's side. Gran Colombia, with its patchwork of regions and resources, was an economic Frankenstein's monster. Revenues from exports like cacao and coffee were as unreliable as a politician's promise. Each region had its own economic interests, and aligning them under a single economic policy was akin to trying to herd particularly stubborn cats. Bolivar's attempts at economic reform were often stymied by the very people he needed to appease. The local elites, wary of losing their grip on regional power, were less than enthusiastic about his centralizing policies. It was a classic case of too many cooks in the kitchen, each with their own recipe for disaster. Amidst this chaos, Bolivar's health, both physical and mental, was deteriorating faster than the dream of Gran Colombia. The relentless stress, combined with the tropical diseases that were as common as political betrayals, took their toll. By 1830, Bolivar was a shadow of his former self, a once vibrant leader reduced to a man battling both his internal demons and the external forces tearing his vision apart. But let's not romanticize his final years too much. Bolivar, in his quest for unity, often found himself at odds with the democratic ideals he once championed. His later policies reflected a shift towards authoritarian control, a fact that history tends to gloss over in the glow of his earlier achievements. The liberator had become a ruler, and the lines between the two were increasingly blurred. By the time of his resignation in 1830, Bolivar's dream was all but shattered. Gran Colombia was on life support, and the regions were clamoring for independence. In his farewell address, Bolivar lamented that those who serve the revolution plow the sea. It was a poignant acknowledgement of the futility he felt, a recognition that his life's work was slipping through his fingers like sand. Bolivar died later that year, at the age of 47, impoverished and heartbroken. The man who had once commanded armies and inspired nations was now a ghost, his legacy as complex and contradictory as the times he lived in. El Libertador, the man of myth and legend, left behind a legacy that was as polarizing as it was profound. So, what can we take away from Bolivar's story? Well, for starters, the path of revolution is rarely straightforward. It's a journey fraught with peril, paradoxes, and power plays. Bolivar's life is a reminder that the line between hero and tyrant is often as thin as the edge of a sword. His legacy, like all great leaders, is a tapestry woven with threads of both triumph and tragedy. Bolivar's vision of a united Latin America was noble, but it was also naive, an idealist's dream in a realist's world. His story is a cautionary tale about the cost of revolutionary change, a reminder that the pursuit of unity can sometimes lead to division. In the end, Bolivar's life was a testament to the complexities of leadership, a saga of ambition and adversity played out on the grand stage of history. His story is a mirror reflecting both the best and worst of human nature, a legacy that continues to inspire, perplex, and challenge us to this day. So, as we bid farewell to El Libertador, let's remember him not just as a figure of legend, but as a man, a flawed, fascinating man who dared to dream big even when the odds were stacked against him. Here's to Simon Bolivar, the liberator who plowed the sea and left us with a legacy as enduring as the Andean peaks he once crossed. In the days before Rome became the rock star of the ancient world, there was a civilization that danced to its own beat in the same boot-shaped peninsula. Enter the Etruscans. These folks were like the indie band that influenced all the big acts, but never quite got the same level of recognition. Existing roughly between 900 BCE and 27 BCE, the Etruscans occupied a region of Italy known as Etruria, covering modern-day Tuscany, parts of Umbria, and Lazio. Now, if you're thinking, where exactly did these people come from? Join the club. Scholars have been scratching their heads about the origins of the Etruscans for centuries. Ancient historians like Herodotus claim they hailed from the east, possibly Lydia in present-day Turkey, while Dionysius of Halicarnassus argued they were homegrown Italians. It's the kind of debate that keeps archaeologists awake at night. The Etruscans might not have left behind a Rosetta Stone to decode their language, but they sure knew how to make an impression with their art and architecture. Etruscan language is a bit of a mystery wrapped in an enigma, written in an alphabet similar to Greek, but largely undeciphered. It's as if they left behind a massive collection of text messages without the emoji to make sense of it all. Of around 13,000 inscriptions we have, only a handful give us any real insight into their society. The rest are linguistic puzzles that would make even a crossword champion weep. But where words fail, art speaks volumes. The Etruscans were masters of pottery, creating intricate and beautiful pieces that would make any Pinterest board jealous. Their baquero ware, a type of black pottery, was highly prized and served as a precursor to the Roman obsession with all things ceramic. They weren't just about pottery, though. The Etruscans built elaborate tombs and were pioneers in urban planning, laying the groundwork for what would become the architectural signature of Rome. They even had a knack for creating lively frescoes that depicted everything from banquets to funerals, showcasing a society that knew how to live large and die with style. Now, let's talk geography. Etruria wasn't just a random patch of land. It was prime, real estate. Sandwiched between the Arno and Tiber rivers was a fertile region that allowed the Etruscans to become prosperous traders. They had a thriving economy based on agriculture, mining, and trade, especially with the Greeks and Phoenicians. In fact, the Etruscans were like the middlemen of the Mediterranean, dealing in goods ranging from iron and copper to luxury items like amber and wine. This trade network was so extensive that Etruscan goods have been found as far afield as Egypt and northern Europe. Despite their influence, the Etruscans weren't exactly peace-loving hippies. They were organized into city-states, each one a fiercely independent unit, kind of like a group of siblings who love each other but will still fight over the TV remote. These city-states, including well-known names like Tarquinia, Veii, and Servidary, frequently clashed with one another, but also worked together when external threats loomed. This loose confederation was both their strength and their weakness, allowing for rich cultural development, but also making them vulnerable to more unified foes. The Etruscans were trailblazers in many ways, but their most lasting legacy might just be the influence they had on Rome. From gladiatorial games to religious rituals, the Romans borrowed heavily from Etruscan culture. The Roman toga, Etruscan. The concept of the triumphal procession, Etruscan. It's like Rome was that kid in high school who borrowed your notes and then aced the test. Even the word Rome itself might have an Etruscan origin, possibly deriving from the Etruscan name, Ruma. Talk about not getting the credit you deserve. One cannot overlook the Etruscans' impact on religion and politics. They were deeply spiritual, with a pantheon of gods that would later be incorporated into Roman mythology. They practiced divination, reading the will of the gods through animal entrails or the flight patterns of birds. It's the ancient equivalent of checking your horoscope, only with a more hands-on approach. Politically, the Etruscans introduced the concept of a king who ruled with the guidance of a council, a model that the early Romans adapted before they got the democratic fever. So, while the Etruscans might not have had the staying power of Rome, their contributions to art, architecture, and culture laid the foundation for what would become one of the most powerful empires in history. They were the unsung heroes, the backstage crew that made sure the show went off without a hitch. And even though they eventually faded into history, their influence echoes through the ages, proving that sometimes the opening act is just as important as the headliner. The Etruscans, those enigmatic maestros of ancient Italy, weren't just dabbling in art and trade. They were orchestrating a social and political symphony that would make any modern government look like a garage band. Their city-states were the beating heart of Etruscan civilization, each one a fiercely independent kingdom with its own ruler, known as a Lucumo. But don't let the title fool you into thinking these guys were sipping wine on a throne all day. The Lucumo was a multitasker, juggling religious, military, and administrative duties like a pro. It's like being a CEO, a priest, and a general all rolled into one. Talk about job stress. These city-states weren't isolated fortresses either. They enjoyed a complex relationship, driven by both rivalry and cooperation. Imagine a family reunion where everyone's bringing their best dish, but secretly hoping to outshine each other. The Etruscans had a penchant for forming leagues, most famously the Dodecapoly, a confederation of 12 city-states. This was no casual meetup. It was a political and religious gathering, complete with a central shrine at the Fanum Voltumni near modern-day Oviedo. Here, the Etruscans would discuss policy, worship their gods, and presumably engage in some good old-fashioned politicking. One can only imagine the backroom deals and alliances forged over goblets of wine. It's worth noting that this confederation, while a symbol of unity, was also a double-edged sword. The Etruscan city-states retained their sovereignty, which meant they could pursue their interests, sometimes at the expense of the collective good. This loose structure made it difficult for them to mount a unified defense against external threats, a vulnerability that Rome would later exploit with ruthless efficiency. It's like trying to organize a group project where everyone insists on doing their own thing. Great for creativity, not so much for cohesion. Now, let's talk about the real power players in Etruscan society, the women. Unlike their Greek and Roman counterparts, Etruscan women enjoyed a surprising level of autonomy and influence. They weren't confined to the domestic sphere, waiting for their husbands to come home with the ancient equivalent of a paycheck. Etruscan women could own property, partake in banquets, and were often depicted alongside men in art and inscriptions. This was a society where women had a voice, and they weren't afraid to use it. According to ancient Roman sources, who, let's be honest, were a bit biased, Etruscan women were scandalously liberated, socializing freely and participating in public life. It's almost as if the Etruscans were centuries ahead of their time, embracing a gender equality that would be revolutionary even today. But why did Etruscan society afford such freedom to women? Some scholars suggest it was due to the importance of family ties and lineage in Etruscan culture. Etruscan women maintained their own names and were often buried with inscriptions that highlighted their maternal lineage. This matrifocal attention could have played a crucial role in their elevated social status. Moreover, with the Etruscans' religious emphasis on prophecy and divination, women could hold significant spiritual sway, interpreting the will of the gods and influencing political decisions. It's like having a seat at the table, but also holding the cards everyone wants to see. In terms of governance, the Etruscans had a system that combined monarchy, oligarchy, and democracy into a uniquely complex tapestry. The Lucumo, elected by the elite, wasn't a tyrant ruling with an iron fist. Instead, he was advised by a council of elders, much like the Roman Senate. This council, known as the Senate, was composed of nobles who wielded significant influence over the decision-making process. It's the ancient equivalent of a board meeting where everyone has a say, but the CEO gets the final word. This blend of power-sharing and hierarchy allowed the Etruscans to maintain a stable government, at least until the Romans came knocking. Economically, the Etruscans were no slouches. Their strategic position between the Greeks and the rest of the Italian peninsula made them a critical hub for trade. They exported a variety of goods, including wine, olive oil, and the aforementioned Baquero pottery, while importing luxury items like Attic vases from Greece. This trade network wasn't just about goods. It was a conduit for ideas, culture, and technology. The Etruscans were like cultural sponges, absorbing influences from their trading partners and blending them into their own unique tapestry. Despite their economic prowess, the Etruscans couldn't escape the realities of ancient geopolitics. The rise of Rome posed a direct threat to their way of life, and the Etruscans found themselves caught in a struggle for dominance in the Italian peninsula. Rome, with its burgeoning military might and insatiable ambition, began to chip away at Etruscan territory. It wasn't long before the once mighty city-states were absorbed into the growing Roman Republic, their culture assimilated, and their independence extinguished. Yet, even in defeat, the Etruscans left an indelible mark on Roman society. The Roman Senate, the toga, the triumphal procession, all bore the unmistakable imprint of Etruscan influence. In many ways, the Etruscans were the unsung architects of Roman identity, their legacy woven into the very fabric of what would become one of history's greatest empires. It's a classic tale of the apprentice surpassing the master, yet forever indebted to the lessons learned. So, while the Etruscans may have faded into the annals of history, their story is far from over. Their contributions to art, politics, and social structure continue to resonate, offering a timeless reminder that even the most enigmatic of civilizations can leave a lasting legacy. As we delve deeper into the mysteries of Etruscan life, one thing is clear. They were a society that thrived on innovation, cooperation, and a healthy dose of competition. A civilization that, though overshadowed by the Rome that followed, was pivotal in shaping the history of the ancient world. The Etruscans, with their knack for innovation and adaptability, were not just cultural trailblazers, but also economic dynamos. Their economy was the envy of the Mediterranean, a vibrant tapestry woven from the threads of trade, agriculture, and metallurgy. Let's dive into why the Etruscans' economic prowess was akin to having a VIP pass to the ancient world's most exclusive club. First, let's talk trade. The Etruscans were masters of the Tyrrhenian Sea, which was their highway to wealth and influence. Picture it as the ancient Amazon Prime, only instead of 2-day shipping. It was all about swift sea routes, connecting Etruria with the rest of the Mediterranean. Their strategic location made them the perfect middlemen between the Greeks to the south and the Celtic tribes to the north. This was no small feat in an age where a storm could turn your trading vessel into a floating cork. Their ships, sturdy and reliable, ferried goods like wine, olive oil, and the coveted Baquero pottery. But hold your horses, that's just the surface. The real treasures lay beneath Etruria's soil, rich deposits of copper and iron that were worth their weight in gold. Mining these resources, the Etruscans turned them into a booming trade network, exporting raw materials and crafted goods. It was like Silicon Valley, but instead of coding, they were smelting and forging. Their ironwork in particular was revolutionary, supplying weapons and tools that were the cutting edge of technology, literally. Speaking of metal, the Etruscan mastery over it was legendary. They didn't just dig up ore, they transformed it into products that were in high demand. Etruscan metalworkers were the rock stars of their time, and their work was so influential that even the Romans couldn't resist taking notes. Etruscan bronze mirrors, intricately decorated with scenes from mythology, were the ancient world's equivalent of a luxury brand watch. Having one meant you were a cut above, and probably a bit of a show-off. But it wasn't just about trade and metal. The Etruscans were also pioneers in agriculture, and their farming practices were surprisingly advanced. They knew the importance of rotating crops and had irrigation systems that would make any modern farmer nod in approval. This expertise in agriculture meant they could support large populations and trade surplus food, making them the original locavores before it was trendy. They cultivated vineyards and olive groves, turning the rolling hills of Tuscany into a verdant patchwork of productivity. Now, if you're wondering how they managed to pull all this off, the answer lies in their societal structure. The Etruscans had a unique blend of collaboration and competition that fueled their economy. While their city-states were fiercely independent, they understood the power of collective bargaining. They formed alliances and leagues, not just for defense, but to enhance trade and commerce. Imagine a neighborhood where everyone competes for the best garden, but they all agree to sell their produce at the local market. That was Etruria, a mix of rivalry and teamwork that kept the economic engine humming. It's worth noting that the Etruscans weren't just about making money. They were about living well. Their wealth funded a lifestyle that would rival any modern-day influencer. Banquets, games, elaborate feasts. They lived large, and their affluence was reflected in their art and architecture. This wasn't mere hedonism. It was a reflection of a society that valued the good life and knew how to achieve it. Of course, no discussion of the Etruscan economy would be complete without acknowledging the darker side. Their prosperity wasn't just from savvy trading and smart farming. It was also built on the backs of laborers who worked the mines and fields. The Etruscan elite enjoyed the fruits of this labor, while the less fortunate bore the burden, a tale as old as time. And let's not forget the looming shadow of Rome, whose expansionist policies would eventually swallow the Etruscan world whole. In the end, the Etruscan economy was a testament to their ingenuity and adaptability. They were a civilization that understood the power of resources, both natural and human, and leveraged them to create a thriving society. Their story is one of innovation, resilience, and yes, a little bit of luck. As we continue to examine their legacy, it's clear that the Etruscans were more than just a footnote in Roman history. They were the architects of their own destiny, and their influence echoes through time, reminding us that even the most enigmatic of civilizations can leave an indelible mark. Stay tuned, because the Etruscan saga is far from over. As the Etruscan saga continues to unfold, we dive headlong into their religion and burial practices, which make Game of Thrones look like a sunny walk in the park. Forget the 7 kingdoms. The Etruscan spiritual world was a complex web of gods, rituals, and afterlife beliefs that would leave even a seasoned Westerosi scratching their head. Let's start with their pantheon of gods, who were as moody as a teenager with their Wi-Fi cut off. The Etruscans didn't just borrow a few gods from their neighbors. They went all out with a pantheon that seemed to have a deity for every occasion. Take Tinia, their chief god of the sky, a Zeus-like figure with a penchant for throwing lightning bolts when things didn't go his way. He was joined by Uni, the queen of the heavens, who could give Hera a run for her money in the jealous spouse department. Then there was Tyran, the goddess of love and vitality, whose exploits might have made even Aphrodite blush. But the Etruscans didn't stop there. They had a whole cast of minor deities, each with their own quirks and responsibilities. Need a good harvest? Better pay homage to Fufluns, the god of vegetation and wine. Want to ensure a safe journey? Invoke the protection of Nethans, the god of the sea. It was like having a divine app store where you could download blessings for every need. Yet, unlike the Greeks or Romans, the Etruscans didn't immortalize their gods in grandiose temples. Instead, they seemed more at home in nature, with sacred groves and natural sites serving as their spiritual hotspots. Now, if you think their gods were volatile, wait until you hear about their necropolises. These sprawling cities of the dead were truly to die for, literally. The Etruscans didn't just bury their dead. They sent them off with a bang, complete with tombs designed to replicate the comforts of the living world. Imagine a mausoleum furnished like a cozy living room, only with more sarcophagi and fewer IKEA catalogues. These tombs, often painted with vibrant frescoes, depicted scenes of banquets, dances, and festivities, a nod to the Etruscan belief that the afterlife was more of a never-ending party than a grim finality. But why all the fuss over the afterlife? Well, the Etruscans had a thing for divination, believing that the will of the gods could be read through signs and omens. If you thought reading your horoscope was intense, try interpreting the future by examining animal livers. That's right. Etruscan priests, or haruspices, practiced hepatoscopy, form of divination using animal entrails, particularly the liver. And let's not forget augury, where the flight patterns of birds were scrutinized like a cosmic GPS. These practices weren't just party tricks. They were integral to decision-making, from agriculture to warfare. Archaeological finds suggest that the Etruscans' obsession with the afterlife wasn't as morbid as it sounds. It was less about death and more about ensuring a smooth transition to the next realm. Their tombs were equipped with everyday items, tools, jewelry, and even food, indicating that they saw death as an extension of life, a journey to be well prepared for. It's like packing for a vacation, but with a one-way ticket. Now, let's debunk a myth. The Etruscans weren't death-obsessed Goths lurking in shadowy burial grounds. Sure, they had a penchant for elaborate funerals, but these were as much about celebrating life as they were about honoring the deceased. Contrary to the belief that they were fixated on the macabre, the Etruscans viewed death as a natural part of the cycle, a transition rather than an end. It's a perspective that might seem foreign today, but for the Etruscans, it was just another chapter in the book of existence. Their burial practices also reveal a society deeply connected to family and lineage. Tomb inscriptions often highlighted the deceased's ancestry, particularly the maternal line, underscoring the importance of familial ties. This emphasis on lineage is one reason Etruscan women enjoyed such social freedom. They were the custodians of family heritage, and their roles in life and death reflected that status. Despite the allure of their religious practices, it's worth noting that the Etruscan spiritual beliefs were a double-edged sword. On the one hand, they provided comfort and continuity. On the other, they reinforced social hierarchies and power dynamics. The elite controlled access to religious knowledge and rituals, consolidating their status and influence. It's a classic case of knowledge is power, with the divine as the ultimate authority. In exploring the Etruscan world, it's clear that their religion and burial practices were as complex as they were fascinating. They offer a window into a civilization that celebrated life in all its forms, even as they prepared for the journey beyond. As we continue to unravel the mysteries of the Etruscans, one thing remains certain. Their legacy is as rich and layered as the frescoes inside their tombs, waiting to be discovered by those willing to look closer. And with that, our journey through the enigmatic world of the Etruscans marches on, leaving us eager for the next chapter in this ancient saga. Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. As we journey through the final chapter of our Etruscan saga, it's time to tackle the big question. What exactly happened to these enigmatic ancient influencers? Did they simply vanish into the mists of time, or did they pull off history's greatest cultural disappearing act? Buckle up, because we're about to explore how the Etruscans shaped Roman culture more than a viral TikTok dance. and left a legacy that's still echoing through Western civilization. First things first, let's clear up the notion that the Etruscans disappeared as if Houdini had a hand in their fate. The truth is, their disappearance was less of a vanishing act and more of a gradual absorption. The Etruscans didn't just poof out of existence. They were systematically integrated into the Roman Republic over the course of several centuries, from around 500 BCE to the early Roman Empire. It's like being slowly absorbed by a cultural sponge, Rome soaking up all the Etruscan goodness, one drop at a time. Now, why did this cultural osmosis happen? Well, the Etruscans had been the dominant force in Italy for a good few centuries, but by the 4th century BCE, Rome had developed a taste for expansion that made a teenage shopaholic look frugal. Rome started annexing Etruscan city-states, one by one, until the Etruscans found themselves enveloped in the Roman fold. By 27 BCE, when Octavian became Augustus and declared himself the first Roman emperor, the Etruscans were pretty much indistinguishable from their Roman neighbors. It's like that friend who gets so into a new trend they become unrecognizable from their former self. But while the Etruscans may have blended into the Roman landscape, their cultural fingerprints were all over the place. Take Roman architecture, for example. The Etruscans were the original architects of many Roman building techniques. The arch, a crucial element in Roman construction, was an Etruscan innovation. Without it, the Colosseum might have been a sad pile of rubble rather than the majestic ruin we know today. In fact, the Romans were so enamored with Etruscan engineering that they adapted their style to suit their own grandiose ambitions. It's like a classic case of the apprentice building on the master's work, only with a few more columns and a lot more marble. Then there's the matter of religion. Rome borrowed heavily from Etruscan religious practices, from divination to the pantheon of gods. The Romans may have Romanized the names and tweaked a few details, but the roots were undeniably Etruscan. Even the concept of the afterlife, with its elaborate rituals and tombs, found its way into Roman culture. Etruscans were essentially the spiritual consultants of ancient Rome, and their expertise left an indelible mark. It's as if the Romans couldn't decide between a career in politics or spirituality, so they picked both, with a little help from their Etruscan mentors. And let's not forget the political scene. The Etruscans introduced the Romans to the idea of a senate, albeit a more exclusive club in the Etruscan context. But the Romans took this idea and ran with it, eventually creating a republic that, for all its flaws, became a model for future democracies. It's like the Etruscans gave Rome the blueprints, and the Romans built the mansion. Talk about getting more than you bargained for. Economically, the Etruscans were the original entrepreneurs of Italy, and their influence didn't vanish with their political independence. Their expertise in trade and mining set a precedent that Rome was only too eager to follow. The Roman economy, with its vast networks of roads and trade routes, was in many ways an extension of the Etruscan model. The Romans took Etruscan economic strategies and scaled them up, turning Italy into the powerhouse of the ancient world. It's like going from a local farmer's market to a global franchise, ambitious, audacious, and very Roman. Now, let's address the myth of the Etruscans as a mysterious, vanished people. While their political identity may have been swallowed by Rome, their cultural legacy lived on, thriving in the very heart of the empire. They weren't ghosts fading into obscurity. They were the invisible architects of a civilization that would dominate the Western world. The Etruscans' greatest trick wasn't disappearing. It was ensuring their ideas and innovations endured, even if their name did not. It's the ultimate legacy, a silent, persistent influence that whispers through the ages. In the grand tapestry of history, the Etruscans were the unsung heroes, the backstage geniuses who crafted the stage upon which Rome strutted its stuff. Their contributions to art, religion, governance, and society were the bedrock upon which the Roman Empire was built. And though the Romans may have taken the spotlight, it was the Etruscans who provided the foundation. Their story is a reminder that history is not just about those who shout the loudest, but also about those whose whispers shape the world. So, as we wrap up this journey through the fascinating world of the Etruscans, let's raise a metaphorical goblet to these ancient innovators. In their quiet way, they changed the course of history, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire and intrigue. Their influence is a testament to the power of culture and ideas, proving that even the most enigmatic of civilizations can leave an indelible mark on the world. And with that, our exploration of the Etruscan legacy comes to a close, leaving us with a newfound appreciation for the enduring power of history's unsung heroes. Before smartphones buzzed at us like needy digital pets or cars zipped by at a speed that would make a 19th century horse faint, life was a bit slower. And by slower, I mean a lot of folks were still rocking wooden shoes and getting excited about a new pair of woolen socks. Yeah, it was like living in a perpetual Etsy store, where everything was handmade bespoke and took about 3 weeks longer than you'd like. Welcome to pre-industrial society, where people had all the time in the world but not much else. It was a time when farming wasn't just a lifestyle choice for hipsters but a necessity. The land was worked by hand, and if you wanted bread, you didn't just pop by the store. You grew the grains, milled them, and baked them yourself. Imagine telling someone in 1750 about Uber Eats. They'd probably think you were a witch. In this era, the average person was lucky to travel more than 20 miles from their birthplace in their entire life. The world was small, local, and everyone had a role that kept the wheels of society turning, albeit those wheels were more like creaky wooden carts. But then, in the late 18th century, a seismic shift began. Enter the Industrial Revolution, a whirlwind of innovation that turned the world upside down faster than you can say, spinning jenny. Ah, yes. The spinning jenny, a delightful contraption that made a mockery of traditional spinning wheels by churning out yarn 8 times faster. The inventor, James Hargreaves, probably didn't realize he was about to kick off a revolution when he dreamed this up in 1764. Suddenly, the quaint cottage industry, where people spun wool by the fireside, was about as relevant as a floppy disk. And then there's James Watt, the man who gave steam engines a glow-up in 1776, the same year the Americans were busy declaring independence. Watt didn't invent the steam engine, but he made it infinitely more efficient, turning it into a powerhouse of industry. It was as if he'd strapped a jet engine to a donkey cart. Factories could now pop up wherever there was fuel and water, and they did, like mushrooms in a damp forest. This technological cocktail did wonders for production. In Britain, textile production soared, growing exponentially, with output in 1800 being 4 times what it was in 1770. That's the kind of productivity jump that modern startups can only dream of. But while the machines hummed and investors counted their profits, the workers found themselves at the sharp end of progress. The industrial boom meant more jobs, yet these were often in stifling factories where safety regulations were as non-existent as unicorns. However, let's not write off the era as a Dickensian nightmare just yet. For all its grime and grind, the Industrial Revolution had everyone buzzing. It was the 18th century equivalent of the internet boom. Suddenly, goods that were once luxuries became accessible to the masses. Cotton clothes, for instance, became so cheap and plentiful that even the humblest households could afford them. It democratized consumption in a way that was unheard of. The economic impact was profound. Britain's GDP, which had been chugging along at a modest pace, suddenly took off like a rocket. By the mid-19th century, it had effectively doubled. This wasn't just a change, it was a metamorphosis. Cities grew as people flocked to work in factories. Towns became bustling hubs of trade, and the countryside started to feel a little empty. The landscape of life itself was reshaping, as if someone had taken a giant eraser to the pastoral idyls of old. But with every gain, there was a cost. The revolution was also a Pandora's box of social challenges. Child labor, exploitative working conditions, and urban crowding became grim realities for many. The myth of the Industrial Revolution as a golden age of progress is tempting, but it's crucial to remember that, for every gleaming new machine, there was a human toll. The era was as much about the grime of factory floors as it was about the shine of new inventions. In this dance of progress and peril, the Industrial Revolution was a beast with many heads. It was an era of contradictions, where the promise of prosperity came with the reality of hardship. The world was being knitted together by steam and steel, but it wasn't a seamless process. As we dig deeper into this transformative time, we'll find a society in flux, hurtling toward modernity at a breakneck speed. But for now, picture those early days, a world where wool was still king, and the future was about to roar into life like a steam engine on full throttle. As the smoke from those roaring steam engines curled skyward, it wasn't just the factory chimneys breaking new ground. Cities were swelling like overinflated balloons, with the population boom rivaling that of a rabbit warren. By the mid-19th century, places like Manchester and Birmingham were less quaint English towns and more like chaotic anthills, bustling with humanity and industry. Urbanization was the name of the game, as the countryside emptied into cities faster than you can say better job prospects. Spoiler alert. The prospects often involved long hours, minimal pay, and a working environment only a Victorian ghost story could love. Let's talk about those factories, where the marvels of modern machinery met the grim reality of human toil. Picture a space with more clatter and clang than a rock concert, with safety standards that made Evil Knievel look cautious. The average workday stretched from dawn till dusk, sometimes longer if the overseer was feeling particularly Scrooge-like. It wasn't uncommon for laborers, including children, to clock upwards of 12 to 16 hours a day. And as for weekends, forget about it. They were as mythical as unicorns in this brave new world. This wasn't just a sweat-a-thon. It was a full-body workout in the worst way possible. Machines were often temperamental, with a penchant for chomping down on the odd finger or limb. In 1833, the Factory Act finally put a limit on child labor. But before that, kids as young as 6 were working in conditions that would make even the most hardened adults wince. Imagine a dimly lit room filled with dust and the cacophony of clattering looms, and you've got the daily grind of a young factory worker. The pay was as small as the workers, with children earning a measly fraction of what was already a paltry wage for adults. Amidst this industrial hustle and bustle, a new beast was born. Modern work culture. The factory whistle became the heartbeat of the day, dictating when to toil and when to rest. It was a far cry from the agrarian rhythms of sunrise and sunset. This regimented lifestyle introduced a sense of time discipline that would become the backbone of urban life. Work-life balance. Not a concept on anyone's radar back then, more like work-life imbalance, where the scales were tipped heavily toward exhaustion. And while we're on the subject of imbalance, let's address the living conditions of the urban poor. Overcrowding in cities reached epic proportions, with slums springing up like unwanted weeds. Entire families squeezed into single rooms, sharing space with more rats than furniture. The sanitation situation was, putting it mildly, dire. Sewage systems were either non-existent or so rudimentary that they might as well have been designed by a toddler with a bucket and spade. Diseases like cholera and typhus thrived in these conditions, cutting swaths through the population with grim efficiency. Yet, for all its Dickensian dreariness, the city offered opportunities the countryside couldn't. The lure of steady wages, however meager, was a powerful draw. It was a bittersweet reality, the promise of a better life tangled with the harshness of survival. The Industrial Revolution was a double-edged sword, bringing both progress and peril. Despite the grime, the city was where change was happening, where the future was being forged in the heat of industry. As the industrial leviathan chugged along, labor movements began to stir. Workers, tired of being treated like expendable cogs in a relentless machine, started to organize. The early 19th century saw the rise of unions, which were about as popular with factory owners as a tax audit. In 1824, the Combination Acts, which had outlawed trade unions, were repealed, giving workers a legal leg up in their fight for fair treatment. It was the start of a long, often bloody struggle to improve working conditions, a battle that would shape labor laws for generations to come. These nascent unions were the underdogs, pitted against powerful industrialists in a David and Goliath showdown. They faced harsh opposition, with strikes often ending in violence. The infamous Peterloo Massacre of 1819 was a grim reminder of how far authorities would go to suppress dissent. But still, the movement grew, fueled by the shared grievances of workers who had had enough of being ground down by the gears of progress. In this era of contradictions, the Industrial Revolution was both a harbinger of modernity and a catalyst for social upheaval. It was a time when steam and steel were reshaping the world, yet leaving many behind in the dust. The rise of urbanization was a testament to humanity's relentless drive to innovate, even as it highlighted our capacity for exploitation. As the wheels of industry turned, they left a trail of both triumph and tragedy. The story of the Industrial Revolution is far from over. This seismic shift was just the opening act in a drama that would continue to unfold, setting the stage for the modern age. But for now, let's leave our tale here, amidst the smoke-filled skies and clattering factories, where progress was both a blessing and a curse. We'll return to this world soon, ready to explore the next chapter of this extraordinary time, where the echoes of those first steam engines can still be heard in the hum of our own bustling cities. As the clamor of steam engines and factory clatter faded behind us, it was time to step into the next act of the Industrial Revolution's grand theatrical performance, the social shake-up. If you thought the era was just about churning out textiles and coal dust, think again. This was a time of profound social transformation, where the cast of society was shuffled and new stars emerged on the stage. First up, let's talk about the surprise headliners, the middle class. Before the Industrial Revolution, society was mostly a two-act play, the landed gentry and the working poor. But with industry booming, a new character entered the fray, the bourgeoisie. They were the managers, the factory owners, and the professionals who found their pockets deepening faster than you can say profit margin. By 1851, about 15% of Britain's population was considered middle class. They weren't just the intermediaries between the rich and the poor. They were trailblazers of a consumer culture that would soon define modern life. With their newfound wealth, the middle class indulged in the finer things in life, like tea, porcelain, and gasp, the novel. Leisure time became a concept, and with it the idea that life was about more than just scraping by. If you were middle class, you could afford to ponder life's big questions while lounging in your parlor, a luxury that would make any Dickensian street urchin's head spin. But while the middle class was sipping tea, women were beginning to stir from the confines of their domestic roles. The Industrial Revolution was like a societal earthquake, and the aftershocks reached the very foundations of gender norms. Women, traditionally relegated to hearth and home, started appearing in the workforce in droves. By the mid-19th century, women comprised about 20% of the industrial workforce. They worked in factories, often in textiles, where their nimble fingers were prized. It was a double-edged spindle, though. While it provided economic independence, the wages were dismal, often half of what men earned. And let's not forget the myth of the self-made man. Ah, yes, the rugged individual who clawed his way up from rags to riches through sheer grit and determination. It's a tale as old as time, or at least as old as Andrew Carnegie. The reality, more often than not, these titans of industry had a little help from friends, family, and the occasional inherited fortune. The playing field was about as level as a roller coaster, with systemic inequalities giving some a head start while others were left in the dust. Speaking of dust, let's sprinkle in some economic theories that emerged from this industrial whirlwind. Capitalism, the star of the show, was strutting its stuff like a peacock at a garden party. It was all about private ownership, free markets, and that sweet, sweet competition. But not everyone was buying the capitalist dream. Enter socialism, capitalism's grumpy cousin, which started gaining traction in response to the glaring inequalities. Think of it as the yin to capitalism's yang, advocating for the redistribution of wealth and collective ownership of the means of production. This ideological tug-of-war was more than just academic navel-gazing. It spilled into politics and labor movements, shaping the world as we know it today. In 1848, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels published the Communist Manifesto, a fiery critique of capitalism that called for the working class to rise up and seize the means of production. Spoiler alert, it didn't happen overnight, but the ideas lit a fire under the labor movement, sparking debates that still rage on. The Industrial Revolution wasn't just an economic metamorphosis. It was a full-blown socio-political upheaval. It was a time when new narratives were being written, with characters who were complex, flawed, and oh so human. The world was in flux, and as the dust settled, the landscape of society was forever altered. As we stand on the cusp of this new era, it's clear that the Industrial Revolution was a crucible of change. It was a time when the old world was being dismantled, and a new one was being forged in the fires of innovation. But before we dive into the next chapter, let's take a moment to appreciate the whirlwind we've just breezed through. The rise of the middle class, the shifting roles of women, and the clash of ideologies were just the opening notes in a symphony of modernity. And as this composition continues, we'll see how these themes play out in the grand opera of history. Stay tuned, because the story is far from over. As the dust of societal transformation settled, the Industrial Revolution entered its next act, and spoiler alert, it was a full-blown environmental horror story. Picture this: cities cloaked in a permanent twilight of soot, where the sun played peekaboo through a haze of smoke. The air was so thick you could almost chew it, and every breath felt like a reluctant sip of a toxic cocktail. London, for instance, became infamous for its pea soup fogs, a charming name for what was essentially a smoggy death trap. By the mid-19th century, the city was shrouded in a murky gloom that would make even the most die-hard Gothic novelists blush. And it wasn't just the air that was taking a hit. Rivers, once the lifeblood of cities, had become liquid landfills. The River Thames, London's crown jewel, transformed into a stinking cesspool, thanks to a steady diet of industrial waste and raw sewage. By 1858, the stench was so bad it earned the delightful moniker, the Great Stink, proving that the Victorians had a knack for understatement. The government, noses pinched and eyes watering, finally decided to act, commissioning the construction of a proper sewage system. But let's not give them too much credit. The move was less about altruism and more about preventing Parliament from becoming a giant chamber pot. Now, if you were living in the countryside, don't think you got off scot-free. The industrial beast had no respect for pastoral idols. Fields were being gobbled up by expanding cities or scarred by the mining operations feeding the industrial maw. The landscape was being rewritten in a language of smoke and steel, with forests chopped down to fuel the ever-hungry furnaces. The environmental cost was staggering, and if you think folks back then were blissfully ignorant of it, think again. Records show that even in the 19th century, people were grumbling about the sky-high pollution levels and the mysterious disappearance of their favorite picnic spots. But let's not get too hung up on the grime and gloom. The Industrial Revolution wasn't just about turning the air into a lung's worst nightmare. It was also a time of incredible technological leaps that connected the world in ways previously unimaginable. Enter the railway, an iron horse that galloped across the landscape, shrinking distances and compressing time. By 1850, Britain had over 6,000 miles of railway track, and the impact was seismic. Suddenly, what once took days by horse and cart could be achieved in hours, revolutionizing everything from trade to travel. Yet, like all good things, the railway came with a catch. The pace of life accelerated, leaving some folks feeling like they were trapped in a runaway train. The railway didn't just move goods and people, it moved expectations. If you weren't keeping up, you were left behind, staring at the vanishing caboose of opportunity. The romantic notion of a leisurely countryside journey was replaced by the reality of rattling carriages and the insistent rhythm of progress. And speaking of speed, let's talk about the telegraph, the Victorian equivalent of a WhatsApp message. Samuel Morse, the man with a code named after him, didn't invent the telegraph, but he certainly put it on the map, literally. By the 1860, a web of telegraph wires crisscrossed continents, allowing messages to travel at the speed of electricity. It was a game changer, shrinking the world into a global village long before the internet was a twinkle in anyone's eye. But, as with the railway, this newfound connectivity didn't come without its dark side. The relentless flow of information was overwhelming, and the pace of business and politics cranked up to a relentless tempo. With great power came great colonial implications. The Industrial Revolution wasn't just an isolated British affair. Its tendrils stretched across the globe, fueled by colonialism's insatiable appetite. European powers, armed with industrial might, swept across continents like a technicolor tidal wave, subduing lands and peoples with a deadly combination of technology and tenacity. The raw materials that fed the factories, cotton from India, rubber from the Congo, tea from China, were extracted through a system of exploitation that was as brutal as it was efficient. Colonialism's reach was vast, and its impact was profound. It wasn't just about redrawing maps, it was about rewriting histories. The industrialized nations viewed their empires as proof of progress, conveniently ignoring the human cost. The myth of the benevolent colonizer, bringing civilization to the savages, was a comforting narrative for those back home, but the reality was far from romantic. Indigenous cultures were uprooted, economies distorted, and societies fractured, all in the name of industrial expansion. As industrialization spread, it also found fertile ground in places like the United States, where it ignited with the force of a prairie fire. By the end of the 19th century, America had its own industrial juggernaut, and cities like New York and Chicago were bustling metropolises, echoing with the clang of construction and the hum of enterprise. This era, dubbed the Gilded Age, was a time of immense wealth and stark inequality, a fitting encore to Britain's industrial debut. So here we stand, knee-deep in the muck of the Industrial Revolution's environmental and global consequences. It's a tangled tale of progress and pollution, of connection and colonialism. This era was a Pandora's box of innovation, and once opened, there was no going back. The world had changed, fundamentally and irrevocably, and the stage was set for the modern age. As the curtain falls on this chapter, the echoes of steam engines and telegraph clicks still reverberate through time, reminding us of a world on the brink of transformation. But don't pack up your curiosity just yet. There's more to explore, more stories to unravel, as we continue this journey through history's industrial heartland. Stay tuned, because the next act is about to begin, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. As we unfurl the final act of this epic Industrial Revolution saga, let's pause for a moment of reckoning. Was the price tag on this unprecedented upheaval a bargain or a boondoggle? The answer is as complex as the intricate gears of a Victorian watch, filled with moments of brilliance, yet occasionally prone to malfunction. First, let's talk legacy. The Industrial Revolution was like the great-great-grandparent of modern technology, the grizzled ancestor whose exploits you can't help but admire, even as you wince at their questionable ethics. It cracked open Pandora's factory, unleashing a wave of technological advancements that we ride to this day. Without it, we might still be living in a world where fast meant a spirited trot on horseback, and mass production involved a single artisan laboriously crafting items one by one. The revolution was the spark that ignited the ongoing blaze of progress, lighting the path for inventions like electricity, the internal combustion engine, and eventually the microchip. In the realm of economics, the revolution was a mixed blessing. Sure, GDPs soared like a kite caught in a gale, and new industries sprouted like dandelions in spring, turning cities into bustling hives of commerce. But let's not forget the human cost, those poor souls who found themselves ground beneath the relentless wheel of progress. It was as if humanity had collectively signed up for a gym membership, only to realize halfway through the workout that the treadmill was set too inhumane. Socially, the Industrial Revolution was a seismic tremor that rattled the very foundations of class structure. It paved the way for the rise of the middle class, a demographic that would become the backbone of modern consumer society. Yet, as the middle class flourished, the working class often found themselves juggling soot-stained dreams with the harsh reality of factory life. Child labor, laughably inadequate wages, and working conditions that would make a Spartan cringe were the unsightly shadows lurking behind the gleam of economic prosperity. Politically, the revolution was both a boon and a bane. It spurred the rise of labor movements, the champions of the underdog who fought for fair wages and safer conditions. The repeal of the Combination Acts in 1824 and the subsequent rise of trade unions were pivotal, marking the beginning of a long struggle for worker rights. Yet the political landscape was also marred by unrest and repression, with events like the Peterloo Massacre casting a long, dark shadow over the triumphant march of progress. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the smog. The environmental fallout of the Industrial Revolution was a cautionary tale written in soot and sulfur. It was a time when Mother Nature found herself at odds with a hyperactive child, industry, who was hell-bent on painting the town black. Modern environmental movements owe a tip of the hat to this era, as it provided the first glaring evidence that perhaps unbridled industrial enthusiasm wasn't such a great idea after all. And yet, for all its grime and grit, the Industrial Revolution was a love letter to human ingenuity. It was a testament to our insatiable curiosity and relentless drive to push boundaries, proving that when it comes to innovation, were like kids in a candy store, unable to resist the allure of the next big thing. This era set the stage for a future where technological advancements continue to define our existence. From the internet to AI, each innovation a direct descendant of those early steam engines and spinning jennies. So, the societal upheaval's worth the price paid. It's a question that invites debate, one that historians will likely argue over as long as there are dusty archives to pore through. But perhaps the Industrial Revolution's greatest legacy is its role as a mirror, reflecting both the heights of human achievement and the depths of our folly. It taught us that progress comes at a cost, one that must be measured not just in economic terms, but in human and environmental impact. As we wrap up this roller coaster ride through the annals of industrial history, let's end on a lighter note. If there's one thing the Industrial Revolution taught us, it's that the human love for convenience is as enduring as a cockroach post-apocalypse. From spinning jennies to smartphones, we crave ease and efficiency with an enthusiasm that borders on obsessive. It's a trait that hasn't dimmed over the centuries, proving that while the tools may change, the desire for convenience is a constant. So, here's to the Industrial Revolution, an era that redefined the world, for better or worse, and left an indelible mark on the pages of history. It was a time of contradictions, where the promise of progress danced with the spectre of peril, and where the echoes of steam engines still resonate in the hum of our modern lives. As we move forward, let us remember the lessons of this transformative time, and perhaps approach the future with a little more wisdom and a lot more humility. And who knows, maybe one day we'll look back on our era with the same mix of awe and incredulity. Until then, let's keep that industrial spirit alive, curious, innovative, and just a tad irreverent. In the bustling heart of ancient Mesopotamia, around 1792 BCE, a young prince named Hammurabi was busy dodging the world's first bureaucratic nightmares and dodging courtly intrigues. The future king of Babylon was about to take the reins of a kingdom that was as volatile as a soap opera and twice as dramatic. Forget the Hollywood version of royalty with gold-plated everything. This was Babylon, where power was a game of chess played with real lives. Hammurabi didn't just wake up one day as the lawgiver etched in stone. No, he was a young man once, likely with a taste for barley beer and a knack for getting into squabbles. His early years were less about divine right and more about keeping your friends close and your frenemies even closer. Mesopotamia wasn't exactly a place where you could afford to be naive. The region was a patchwork quilt of city-states, all vying for control, all swaddled in ambitions that could make a Game of Thrones character blush. The court of Babylon was a place where alliances were as crucial as bread and water. Hammurabi's ascent to the throne wasn't just a matter of birthright, but also a lesson in strategic partnerships. To climb that ladder, he needed to be as savvy as a modern-day CEO, minus the quarterly earnings reports. He knew the value of a good alliance, like that one friend who always comes through with the right advice, or, in Hammurabi's case, military support. In Babylon, court life was a bit like the Mesopotamian version of the Real Housewives, but with fewer sequins and more clay tablets. The city was a hub of trade and culture, a magnet for traders from as far as the Indus Valley in Egypt. It was a place where you could get your hands on anything from lapis lazuli to a decent sheep if you knew the right people. Hammurabi's court was a melting pot of ideas, people, and goods, making it the epicenter of a vibrant and sometimes volatile world. Now, let's talk about Hammurabi's early PR game. He wasn't just some ruler sitting on a gilded throne, waiting for scribes to chisel his every decree into stone. Oh no, Hammurabi was a master of the ancient spin. He understood that to be a successful king, you had to be seen as something more than just a figurehead. He styled himself as a shepherd of his people, a protector and a provider. This wasn't just some metaphor. It was a calculated move to ensure his subjects saw him as indispensable. And then there's the myth of the divine right to rule, which is about as real as a unicorn at a medieval fair. Hammurabi's success had less to do with celestial endorsement and more with his ability to navigate the political labyrinth of the time. He was the kind of guy who could walk into a room full of rival city-state rulers and come out with a treaty, or at the very least, a temporary ceasefire. He knew that in a world where the average lifespan was about 35 years, You needed all the alliances you could get. Young Prince understood the game of power wasn't just a solo endeavor. Hammurabi had allies like Rimsin of Larsa, at least until they weren't allies anymore. Trust in ancient Mesopotamia was a currency, and it could devalue faster than a Babylonian shekel in a bad trade deal. Hammurabi learned quickly that sometimes your best friend today could be your worst enemy tomorrow. His ability to pivot, to renegotiate, and to outmaneuver rivals became the stuff of legend. As Hammurabi rose to power, Babylon became more than just his playground. It was his chessboard. Each move was deliberate, calculated, and sometimes downright ruthless. And while we're on the subject of ruthlessness, let's debunk another myth. Hammurabi wasn't just some benevolent king handing out justice like candy at a parade. His laws, the famous Code of Hammurabi, were as much about consolidating power as they were about fairness. He knew the value of a good law was in its ability to keep the peace and keep him on the throne. Hammurabi's early years were marked by a shrewd understanding of the human condition and a flair for leadership that was as pragmatic as it was charismatic. His ability to read the room, to anticipate the moves of friend and foe alike, was legendary. It was this savvy that allowed him to transform Babylon from a modest city-state into a formidable empire. So, as Hammurabi took the throne, he wasn't just another king with a fancy title and a penchant for stylish robes. He was a man with a plan, a ruler who understood that, in the cutthroat world of ancient Mesopotamia, the only thing more important than power was knowing how to wield it. In a world where the average person's lifespan meant they were lucky to see their 35th birthday, Hammurabi understood that the real power lay not just in leading an empire, but in writing the rules that governed it. Enter the Code of Hammurabi, the ancient world's most famous rulebook, which, contrary to popular belief, was less about justice for all and more about keeping everyone in line, especially those pesky peasants who didn't know their place. Let's set the scene. It's around 1754 BCE, and Hammurabi has just unleashed his code. 282 laws etched into a black diorite steel standing about 7 feet tall. Picture a stone monolith that screams, "Don't mess with Babylon." Now, this wasn't just a legal document. It was a PR masterpiece. Imagine if Hammurabi had Twitter. #Justice Served would be trending, but with a Babylonian twist. While romantic tales would have you believe this was a precursor to modern Western justice, let's not get carried away. Sure, the code had some progressive bits like protecting widows and orphans, but it wasn't exactly a beacon of equality. The reality, it was more like a legal menu where what you paid depended on your social status. Hammurabi was the kind of guy who knew that equality was great in theory, but in practice, not so much. Take the infamous eye for an eye business. Sounds straightforward, right? But like any good legal system, the devil's in the details. If you were part of the Babylonian elite, that eye might cost a whole lot more. Punishments varied widely depending on your rank in society. In modern terms, think of it as getting a parking ticket versus a full-on car confiscation, depending on whether you drove a beat-up wagon or a gilded chariot. Hammurabi's code was as much about asserting control as it was about keeping the peace. It was the ancient world's version of law and order, a tool to reinforce hierarchies and remind everyone who's boss. And who did it serve best? Spoiler alert, not the common folk. It was more about keeping the power structures intact, ensuring that the upper echelons of Babylonian society stayed comfortably cushioned from the rabble. Court fees. Oh, they were a thing, all right. You think today's legal fees are bad? Try navigating ancient Babylonian litigation. You might have had a legitimate grievance, but if your purse was light, chances were you'd be left in the dust. Justice, in many ways, was a luxury good, available to those who could afford it. The code might as well have come with a disclaimer. Justice served, terms and conditions apply. But Hammurabi wasn't just some tyrant twirling a metaphorical mustache. He was savvy enough to know that a stable society made for a stable throne. His laws covered everything from trade to theft to family matters. Got a problem with your neighbor's ox trampling your crops? There's a law for that. Marriage on the rocks because your spouse spent too much time at the local ziggurat? Covered. It was comprehensive, sure, but also a bit like reading the fine print on an ancient insurance policy. Economically speaking, the code was a boon for Babylonian trade. By standardizing laws, Hammurabi ensured that merchants from far-flung regions knew what to expect when doing business in Babylon. This wasn't just about fairness. It was about making Babylon the Walmart of the ancient world, a one-stop shop where you knew the rules before you even entered the bazaar. Now, let's talk about the quirks. Ever heard of the ordeal by water test? If you were accused of sorcery or another crime, sometimes the solution was as simple as a swim. If you floated, you were guilty. Sink, and you were innocent, assuming you survived, of course. It's like the world's worst swimming lesson, where the stakes were a bit higher than a participation ribbon. Yet, despite the harsh realities, the Code of Hammurabi captured the imagination like few other legal codes. It was part myth, part reality, a blend that has kept historians and storytellers fascinated for millennia. The romantic appeal of a king striving to bring order in chaos is undeniable, even if the reality was more about keeping the chaos manageable and the peasants in check. As we peel back the layers of Hammurabi's legal masterpiece, we find a complex tapestry of control, commerce, and a little bit of compassion, just enough to keep the masses from revolting. It was a code that echoed the realities of its time, a reflection of a world where survival often trumped fairness. So, the next time you hear about the fairness of ancient laws, remember, justice was more about maintaining the status quo than leveling the playing field. And while Hammurabi's laws were etched in stone, his legacy was anything but set in stone. This was a king who understood that rules were meant to serve the ruler as much as the ruled, a lesson as old as time, wrapped in the hard, unyielding stone of Babylonian ambition. As we move forward, keep this in mind. Hammurabi's code was as much about the Game of Thrones as it was about the law. Hammurabi wasn't just a lawmaker chiseling justice into stone. He was also a shrewd military strategist with a knack for territorial expansion that would make even the most seasoned Fortune 500 CEOs nod in approval. Picture a world where city-states were jostling for dominance like contestants on a reality TV show, with alliances as flimsy as a contestant's promise to always be there for their newfound best friend. Hammurabi knew that to keep Babylon not just surviving but thriving, he needed more than just a solid legal code. He needed land, resources, and a reputation that made everyone else a little bit nervous. In the ancient game of risk that was Mesopotamia, Hammurabi played a long game. His military campaigns were like a chess match where he not only anticipated his opponent's moves, but also knew which piece to sacrifice for the greater good. Take Larsa, for instance. Around 1763 BCE, Hammurabi turned his gaze southward to Larsa, a prosperous city-state known for its wealth, and its ruler, Rim-Sin-I. It was less a matter of if Hammurabi would make a move, and more a question of when. The answer came in the form of a calculated strike that not only toppled Rim-Sin, but also brought Larsa and its riches under Babylonian control. Now, let's put this in perspective. Rim-Sin had ruled Larsa for nearly 60 years, an impressive feat in a time when rulers often had the lifespan of a mayfly. Hammurabi's victory here wasn't just a military win. It was a statement. It said, Babylon plays for keeps. The acquisition of Larsa wasn't merely about adding another city to the Babylonian map. It was about securing vital trade routes and agricultural resources. In modern terms, it was the equivalent of a hostile takeover where the acquired company didn't just bring in revenue, but also opened doors to new markets. And Hammurabi didn't stop there. His eyes next turned toward the north, to Eshnunna and Mari. These weren't just random targets on a map. They were strategic choices. Eshnunna controlled important trade routes, while Mari was a bustling hub of commerce and culture. By the time Hammurabi was done, he had not only expanded Babylon's reach, but had also secured control over the Euphrates River, a lifeline for trade and communication. It was like owning the only highway in town. Everyone had to pay the toll or face the wrath of Babylon. The numbers tell a story of ambition and strategy. Hammurabi's campaigns stretched over a decade, a relentless march that saw the Babylonian Empire grow in size and influence. By the time the dust settled, Hammurabi's Babylon controlled an area larger than modern-day Iraq. His empire wasn't just a collection of territories. It was an interconnected web of resources, people, and power. It was this network that allowed Babylon to flourish, drawing traders, artisans, and intellectuals from across the ancient world to its gates. But let's not romanticize this too much. Hammurabi's conquests weren't all glorious battles and grand victories. There were sieges that dragged on for months, supply lines that strained under the weight of extended campaigns, and the ever-present threat of rebellion in newly conquered territories. This wasn't a series of clean, decisive victories. It was a grinding, sometimes brutal affair. Hammurabi knew that to keep his empire intact, he needed more than just military might. He needed an iron grip on administration and governance. Hammurabi's strategy was as much about diplomacy as it was about warfare. He had a talent for turning former enemies into allies, a skill that would make even the most seasoned diplomat envious. After conquering Mari, he didn't just leave a garrison and call it a day. Instead, he worked to integrate the city into his empire, maintaining its cultural significance while ensuring it served Babylonian interests. It was a delicate balance, one that required both carrot and stick. Yet, for all his successes, Hammurabi's reign was not without its challenges. The logistics of managing an empire the size of Babylon's were staggering. Communication was slow, reliant on messengers, and clay tablets rather than emails and conference calls. And while Hammurabi was undoubtedly a master of strategy, even he couldn't be everywhere at once. Delegating authority to trusted officials was essential, though it came with the risk of corruption and incompetence, a risk that could undermine even the most robust empire. Hammurabi's military campaigns and the resulting expansion of Babylon were a testament to his understanding of both the art of war and the economics of empire. He knew that power was not just about having the biggest army, but about leveraging resources effectively, maintaining control over key territories, and ensuring that Babylon remained the center of the Mesopotamian universe. It was this combination of military prowess and economic savvy that made Babylon the city of the ancient world, a place where innovation and tradition walked hand in hand. As we leave Hammurabi on the cusp of another conquest, it's clear that his legacy was built on more than just laws and battles. It was built on a vision of a unified Mesopotamia, one where Babylon stood at the heart of trade and culture. But with great power comes, well, you know the rest. Hammurabi's story is far from over, and as we continue to unravel the threads of his reign, we'll see how he navigated the challenges of empire building with the cunning of a fox, and the resolve of a king who knew that true power lay in the ability to adapt, to innovate, and to inspire. Yet, as Hammurabi surveyed his expanding dominion, he knew that military conquests alone wouldn't secure his legacy. Enter the world of public works and economic policy, because nothing says I'm in charge quite like grandiose construction projects and a robust economy. And while textbooks might paint Hammurabi as the Steve Jobs of Mesopotamian infrastructure, the reality was a bit grittier, with more mud and fewer turtlenecks. Let's start with the crown jewels of Hammurabi's infrastructure, irrigation canals. In a land where the word rain was about as common as unicorn sightings, these waterways were lifelines, turning arid fields into fertile breadbaskets. Hammurabi's vision was nothing if not ambitious, constructing an intricate network that spanned hundreds of miles. Picture this, a sprawling web of channels, each one meticulously dug by laborers who probably didn't sign up for this in their job description. The canals ensured that crops flourished, trade thrived, and Babylon maintained its status as the Mesopotamian metropolis. But here's the kicker. While these canals were a marvel of engineering, they were also a massive flex of power. Imagine Hammurabi standing on the banks of a newly completed canal, arms crossed, as if to say, behold, the lifeblood of Babylon, courtesy of yours truly. Sure, these projects benefited the public, but let's not kid ourselves. They were as much about consolidating control as they were about civic duty. Now you might be thinking, wow, Hammurabi was quite the humanitarian. Hold that thought. The folks who actually built these canals, they'd likely disagree. Laborers, often conscripted from the lower echelons of society, toiled under the blistering sun, armed with little more than rudimentary tools and a dream of not collapsing from exhaustion. It was less about building a better Babylon and more about keeping the wheels of Hammurabi's empire turning. And then there's the matter of ziggurats, those massive step pyramids that scream, "Look at me, I'm important." The Eremenenki, a towering ziggurat in Babylon, was ostensibly a place of worship. But let's be real. It was also a colossal, keep out, sign for any would-be challengers to Hammurabi's rule. Standing at an estimated 300 feet tall, it was both a spiritual beacon and a not-so-subtle reminder of who called the shots. But constructing these architectural wonders wasn't a walk in the hanging gardens. It was back-breaking work, carried out by a workforce that likely had little choice in the matter. Picture lines of laborers hauling massive bricks, each one weighing as much as a small car, with the promise of divine favor being their only reward. The ziggurat was as much a testament to human endurance as it was to Hammurabi's ambition. And let's talk economics, because for Hammurabi, these public works weren't just about showing off his mad construction skills. They were strategic investments in Babylon's economic engine. By controlling the flow of water and the construction of towering monuments, Hammurabi wasn't just shaping the landscape, he was shaping the economy. The canals boosted agricultural output, which in turn fueled trade, bringing wealth into Babylon and ensuring the city's coffers were always jingling. The numbers don't lie. Under Hammurabi's reign, Babylon became a commercial powerhouse, its markets bustling with activity, from textiles to precious metals. Traders flocked to Babylon like it was ancient Mesopotamia's version of Wall Street, eager to cash in on the city's economic boom. But while the trade winds were favorable for merchants and the elite, the average worker might have felt like they were rowing against the current in a leaky boat. While it's tempting to romanticize Hammurabi as an ancient visionary, the reality is that his economic policies were often a double-edged sword. The irrigation systems and monumental architecture turned Babylon into the envy of the ancient world. But the cost of these projects wasn't just measured in silver and grain. It was measured in human sweat and toil. The myth of the benevolent king meets the gritty reality of Mesopotamian labor, where the glory of Babylon was built on the backs of its least powerful citizens. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Hammurabi's policies did lay the foundations for a thriving society, one where trade routes crisscrossed the empire and wealth flowed like the Euphrates at flood stage. It was a balancing act, a tightrope walk between economic prosperity and social stability, where Hammurabi had to ensure that the benefits of his reign trickled down just enough to keep the populace from revolting. In the end, Hammurabi's economic and infrastructural legacy was as complex as the man himself, a blend of ambition, innovation, and a touch of ruthlessness. It was a legacy that would resonate throughout the ages, a testament to the power of one man's vision to shape the destiny of a civilization. Yet, as we peel back the layers of this ancient world, the story of Hammurabi's Babylon remains unfinished, teetering on the brink of new challenges and the inevitable march of history. Stay tuned for more as we continue to unravel the enigmatic reign of one of history's most fascinating rulers. As the curtain falls on Hammurabi's reign, we find ourselves at a crossroads between the grandiosity of his achievements and the gritty aftermath they left behind. When Hammurabi shuffled off his mortal coil in 1750 BCE, his death was less of a gentle transition and more of a seismic shift that shook the Babylonian Empire to its very core. Think of it as the historical equivalent of a rock star's departure. Cue the power struggles, the uncertainty, and the existential crises of those left in his wake. You see, Hammurabi didn't just leave behind an empire, he left behind a colossal question mark. The man had woven a tapestry so intricate that once he was gone, everyone was left wondering if the seams would hold. His successors faced the unenviable task of stepping into shoes that were not only big, but downright intimidating. Imagine trying to conduct an orchestra after the maestro's final bow. It's no small feat. While Hammurabi's empire was a marvel, it was also a patchwork quilt of alliances and conquests, each stitched together with the thread of his charisma and cunning. The unity Hammurabi forged was as much about his own force of personality as it was about any lasting political structure. Like a house of cards, it looked impressive when standing tall, but remove one card, namely Hammurabi himself, and the whole thing threatened to come tumbling down. Economically, the empire was a powerhouse, but it also had the fragility of a Jenga tower. Hammurabi's strategic canals and trade routes were the arteries of Babylon's economy, yet they required constant maintenance, both in terms of physical labor and political stability. Without the guiding hand of the king, these systems faced potential collapse. The logistics of managing such an empire without Hammurabi's oversight were akin to trying to ride a unicycle on a tightrope, passable but precarious. Politically, the waters were even murkier. The power vacuum left by Hammurabi's death was like catnip to rival factions. His successors, such as his son Samsuiluna, inherited not just the throne, but a host of simmering tensions. Samsuiluna found himself in a constant game of whack-a-mole, with revolts popping up faster than a Babylonian could say, Code of Hammurabi. It was as if the empire was daring its new ruler to prove his mettle, or be swallowed by the very territories his father had painstakingly secured. Yet, for all the chaos, Hammurabi's legend didn't just survive, it thrived. How does a king known for his iron-fisted rule and monumental projects become the darling of history? Well, it's all about the packaging, my friends. Hammurabi's story was the original blend of fact and fiction, a narrative that mixed harsh realities with romanticized ideals. His code, with its iconic eye for an eye ethos, was etched in stone, both literally and metaphorically, as a symbol of justice, even if the truth was more about maintaining control than dispensing fairness. It's not just historians who have kept Hammurabi's flame alive, it's storytellers, too. His life reads like an epic, complete with battles, betrayals, and the kind of political maneuvering that would make Machiavelli nod in appreciation. Hammurabi managed to craft a legacy that was both inspirational and cautionary, a roadmap for leaders who dare to dream big but must grapple with the gritty realities of power. So, what can modern leaders glean from Hammurabi's tale? For starters, the art of the PR stunt isn't a 21st century invention. Hammurabi was the original spin doctor, a ruler who understood the power of perception. His code was as much a message to his subjects as it was to his rivals. Babylon was a force to be reckoned with. Modern leaders take note. The narrative you craft can outlive even your most ambitious policies. Moreover, Hammurabi's story is a testament to the delicate balance of power and responsibility. His empire was a complex machine that required constant attention and adjustment. The lesson here: building something great is one thing, maintaining it is another beast entirely. Whether it's an empire or a startup, the principles remain the same: visionary leadership, economic acumen, and the occasional ruthless decision to keep the wheels turning. As we wrap up this saga, it's essential to remember that Hammurabi's legacy is not just about stone tablets and grand conquests. It's a reflection of the human condition, a reminder that history's greatest figures were as flawed and fascinating as the societies they shaped. Hammurabi's Babylon may have eventually fallen, but his influence endures, a testament to the enduring power of a well-told story. And so, we leave Hammurabi not as a distant figure in the annals of history, but as a familiar character whose tale still echoes through the ages, reminding us that the past is never truly past. It's merely a prelude to the stories yet to unfold. In the grand tapestry of human history, few figures shimmer quite as brightly as the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. These folks weren't just rulers. They were human god hybrids strutting around in gold-laden sandals, with enough bling to make a modern rapper blush. But before we get seduced by the glitz, let's dig into the divine smoke and mirrors that turned mere mortals into living deities, complete with tombs that make modern do not disturb signs look like child's play. Consider this. Pharaohs were part of a divine propaganda machine so slick it makes modern spin doctors look like amateurs. These rulers were the epitome of a PR success story, convincing everyone that the Nile wouldn't flood and crops wouldn't grow without their cosmic connection. Not bad for a day's work. But what did it really take to keep this celestial charade going? Well, a whole lot of economic juggling for starters. The grandeur of a pharaoh's court didn't come cheap. Those pyramid projects, while impressive feats of engineering, were also massive cash sinks. We're talking about construction bills that would make any accountant break out in a cold sweat. The most iconic of these, the Great Pyramid of Giza, took around 20 years to build and demanded the labor of thousands. Now, before you start picturing whip-cracking overseers, let's bust a myth. Most of the workforce were actually paid laborers, not slaves. Their wages, bread, beer, and the occasional tax break. Who knew carbs and booze were the currency of ancient times? As for the political side, the pharaohs needed to ensure that their crowns stayed firmly on their well-coiffed heads. This meant intricate political maneuvering, marrying into the right families, making alliances, and occasionally a bit of old-fashioned divine intervention to keep the populace in line. The ancient Egyptian society was stratified like a wedding cake, with the pharaoh sitting pretty at the top. but it was the priests and scribes who often held the knife. Let's not forget the pyramids themselves, those massive hunks of stone that have withstood the test of time and the relentless sands of the desert. These weren't just tombs, they were statements. Think of them as the world's most elaborate, no trespassing signs. Each stone in the pyramid was a testament to the pharaoh's power, a colossal reminder of their status as a god among men, meant to last for eternity. In fact, the base of the Great Pyramid covers more than 13 acres, and it originally stood at a height of about 481 feet, an architectural mic drop if there ever was one. But the grandeur wasn't just about flexing architectural muscles. It was fundamentally about control, religious, economic, and political. The pharaoh's divine status was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it legitimized their rule. On the other, it demanded constant reaffirmation through rituals, monuments, and occasionally the odd miracle. Those who questioned this divine narrative were, well, quickly reminded of their mortality. In a society where the Nile's floods determined life or death, aligning oneself with the gods was a pretty smart career move. Now, let's talk about the economic realities of sustaining such an empire. The Nile was Egypt's lifeline, turning arid land into fertile soil, but it was also unpredictable. Pharaohs needed to ensure a steady stream of resources to maintain their lavish lifestyles and fund monumental projects. This required a complex system of taxation, trade, and labor organization. Grain was the gold standard, and controlling its distribution meant controlling the economy. The pharaoh's bureaucracy was a well-oiled machine, with scribes and officials keeping meticulous records, ancient spreadsheets carved into stone. Political maneuvering was as crucial as managing resources. Maintaining power often involved strategic marriages and alliances, sometimes with neighboring powers. The pharaohs were adept at playing the long game, ensuring that their bloodline remained on the throne. However, betrayals and power struggles were never far from the surface. The stories of palace intrigue rival any modern political drama, with court factions and scheming advisors adding to the mix. In essence, the pharaohs were masterful illusionists, weaving a narrative of divine right and absolute power, all while juggling the harsh realities of economics and politics. They were the original influencers, crafting an image that resonated through the ages. Their legacy, etched in the sands of time, continues to captivate us, reminding us that sometimes belief is the most potent form of power. Transitioning from the pharaohs to the priests and nobles of ancient Egypt is like moving from the headline act to the behind-the-scenes producers who really make the show happen. These individuals weren't just spiritual guides. They were the original power brokers of the Nile, mixing a cocktail of religion, economics, and a dash of real estate acumen. If you think modern bankers have sway, you haven't met the temple priests of Egypt. Picture a society where the spiritual and temporal powers are inextricably linked. The priests were not just intermediaries between the gods and the people, they were also the masters of the Egyptian economy. Their temples were the equivalent of Wall Street, with more papyrus and fewer suits. These places weren't just sites of worship, they were buzzing centers of commerce and finance. Ancient Egyptian temples functioned as banks, and the priests were the original hedge fund managers. They controlled vast tracts of land, collected taxes, and even lent grain to the populace. Talk about a diversified portfolio. The influence of the priests extended beyond spiritual rites. They were the landlords of the Nile, managing estates that spanned thousands of acres. And these weren't just barren plots of sand. They were fertile lands that yielded precious crops, which were the backbone of Egypt's economy. The priests ensured the temples were financially self-sufficient, and in doing so, they amassed considerable wealth and power. The temples employed thousands, from farmers and craftsmen to scribes and laborers. The grain surpluses stored within temple granaries were akin to a national treasury, securing the economic stability of the region during times of famine. Now, let's not get too swept up in the romantic notion of these priests as benevolent guardians of the people. Their economic clout gave them significant political leverage. They could sway decisions and influence pharaohs, acting as kingmakers when the political winds shifted. In many ways, they were the original influencers, operating from the shadows while maintaining a facade of divine service. The priesthood was a lucrative career path, one that many nobles aspired to because it offered both spiritual prestige and economic power. Speaking of nobles, these folks were the aristocracy of ancient Egypt, the creme de la creme who held high-ranking positions in the pharaoh's court. Nobles were the ones who orchestrated the day-to-day running of the state, acting as governors, military leaders, and advisors. They were the bureaucrats who ensured that the machinery of the Egyptian state kept turning smoothly, or at least as smoothly as an ancient bureaucracy could manage. It was a life of privilege, with access to the finest luxuries and the most opulent estates. But let's not kid ourselves. The path to nobility was often paved with familial connections and strategic marriages rather than merit. Nobles also played the real estate game like pros. Their estates were not merely homes, but economic units that contributed to their wealth. These estates were often passed down through generations, expanding in size and influence with each passing era. It wasn't just about owning land. It was about controlling the resources and labor that came with it. The more land you controlled, the more grain you harvested, and consequently, the more power you wielded. The economic prowess of the priests and nobles was a double-edged sword for the pharaohs. On one hand, they were indispensable allies in maintaining the stability and prosperity of the kingdom. On the other, their growing influence posed a potential threat to the central authority of the pharaoh. It was a delicate balance of power, a constant tug-of-war between cooperation and rivalry. The pharaohs needed the support of the priests and nobles, but they also had to ensure that no one individual or group became too powerful. In this intricate dance of power, the priests and nobles were both the architects and the beneficiaries of Egypt's prosperity. They were the ones who kept the wheels of the economy turning, who ensured that the temples and estates were well managed and productive. Yet, their influence was not just limited to the earthly realm. They were deeply involved in the spiritual life of the Egyptians, conducting rituals and ceremonies that were believed to appease the gods and ensure the continuation of the cyclical floods of the Nile. However, let's debunk the notion that these priests were purely altruistic in their spiritual duties. The rituals they performed were as much about maintaining their own status and influence as they were about serving the divine. By controlling the religious narrative, they reinforced their position in society, ensuring that their role remained indispensable. It was a clever strategy, intertwining the sacred with the mundane, the spiritual with the economic. Economic system of ancient Egypt was a complex web of interdependencies, with the priests and nobles at the center. They were the linchpins of the society, the ones who ensured that the divine right of the pharaoh was not just a theological concept, but an economic reality. It's no wonder, then, that their influence permeated all levels of Egyptian society, from the grand palaces of the pharaohs to the smallest village along the Nile. As we navigate through the sands of time, it becomes clear that the story of ancient Egypt is not just a tale of monumental pyramids and divine rulers. It's a rich tapestry of interwoven narratives, where the priests and nobles played a critical role in shaping the destiny of a civilization. They were the ones who wielded the power behind the throne, ensuring that the legacy of the pharaohs was preserved and that the prosperity of Egypt endured through the ages. But don't think for a moment that their story ends here. The saga of ancient Egypt continues, revealing new layers of intrigue and complexity. As we delve deeper into this fascinating civilization, we'll uncover more about the social structures and cultural practices that defined an era. The priests and nobles may have been the original influencers of the Nile, but their legacy is just one part of the intricate mosaic that is ancient Egypt. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the mysteries and marvels of this extraordinary civilization, one story at a time. In the grand narrative of ancient Egypt, the scribes and officials were the unsung backstage crew making sure the show went on without a hitch. If pharaohs were the rock stars and priests the producers, these pencil pushers were the roadies, ensuring everything from census counts to the timely dispatch of divine decrees. Forget golden sarcophagi. For these folks, a reed pen and a slab of papyrus were the ultimate status symbols. It's time to give these bureaucratic wizards their due credit, or blame, if you were on the receiving end of their tax scrolls. Now, let's get one thing straight. In ancient Egypt, the ability to read and write wasn't just a useful skill. It was your ticket to the big leagues. Literacy was as exclusive as a members-only club, with scribes being the gatekeepers. Imagine walking into a job interview today and wowing the panel simply by writing down your name. That's how rarefied this skill was. Estimates suggest that only about 1% of the population could read and write, making scribes invaluable assets to the state. These were the data analysts of their day, wielding styluses instead of spreadsheets, but crunching numbers just the same. The work of scribes was nothing short of Herculean. They maintained meticulous records on everything from crop yields to labor assignments. Picture it. Rows of scribes hunched over their desks, churning out column after column of hieroglyphs, each mark a testament to the Pharaoh's divine order. These weren't just doodles. They were the backbone of an empire. When it came to tax season, scribes were the ones who ensured that every bushel of grain was accounted for, every plot of land assessed. Their records were as binding as any modern-day auditor's spreadsheet. Speaking of taxes, here's a spicy tidbit. Ancient audits could be just as terrifying as today's IRS inquiries. If discrepancies were found, the consequences could be severe, and I'm not talking about a slap on the wrist. Depending on the era and ruler, penalties for tax evasion ranged from fines to forced labor, or worse. Think of it as the ancient world's version of go directly to jail. Do not pass go. And if you thought tax loopholes were a modern invention, think again. Wealthy Egyptians often found creative ways to shield their assets, sometimes through cunning declarations of off-the-books temple donations. The scribes knew all the tricks of the trade, but they also knew who buttered their bread, so to speak. The role of scribes extended beyond mere bookkeeping. They were the legal eagles of their time, drafting contracts and decrees that dictated the course of Egyptian society. Their authority was so respected that they often served as judges in local courts, arbitrating disputes and ensuring the pharaoh's laws were enforced. It was a heady mix of power and responsibility, and one that came with its own set of perks. Scribes were among the few commoners who could rise to positions of substantial influence, their expertise a valuable commodity in the bureaucratic machinery. Now, let's not romanticize this too much. For every scribe dedicated to the principles of justice, there were others more interested in lining their own pockets or currying favor with influential patrons. Corruption wasn't just a modern-day headache, it was a perennial problem. Some scribes used their skills to manipulate records, feathering their own nests while turning a blind eye to the misdeeds of their allies. It was a high-stakes balancing act, navigating the often murky waters of loyalty and ambition. But what about the officials, those administrators who took the scribes' data and turned it into policy? These folks were the middle management of the ancient world, overseeing everything from military logistics to public works projects. They were the ones who ensured that the pharaoh's grand visions became reality, translating lofty decrees into actionable plans. Yet, like any good middle manager, they were often caught between the rock of royal expectations and the hard place of practical limitations. The officials' work was essential for maintaining the intricate network of the Egyptian state. They coordinated vast labor forces for monumental construction projects, managed the distribution of resources, and oversaw the implementation of laws. Their efficiency determined whether the kingdom prospered or faltered. They were the ones who had to ensure that the workforce was adequately fed, that the grain supplies were secure, and that the irrigation systems functioned smoothly. It was a role that required both strategic vision and a keen eye for detail. Despite the importance of their work, officials often found themselves in a precarious position. They were held accountable for any failures, and were frequently the scapegoats when things went wrong. The volatile nature of politics meant that their fortunes could change overnight. One minute, they were the pharaoh's trusted advisors. The next, they were out on their ear, victims of court intrigue or shifting allegiances. It was not a role for the faint of heart. These bureaucratic roles may not have been glamorous, but they were the glue that held the Egyptian empire together. Scribes and officials ensured that the wheels of government kept turning, that the pharaoh's will was enacted, that the nation continued to thrive. They were the unsung heroes, or villains, depending on your perspective, of the ancient Egyptian story. And let's not forget the divine decrees. In a society where the pharaoh was considered a living god, divine decrees were treated with an almost fanatical reverence. These proclamations were carved into stone and displayed in public places, a constant reminder of the supreme will of the ruler. The scribes were the ones who inscribed these edicts, their words etched into history as eternal as the stones themselves. It was a task of immense gravity, for each decree reinforced the pharaoh's divine mandate and underscored the celestial order of the universe. Of course, not all decrees were received with universal acclaim, and therein lies the drama. The scribes and officials often found themselves in the crosshairs of public discontent, the bearers of unpopular decisions. Whether it was a new tax, a conscription order, or a shift in religious policy, they were the ones who had to face the music when the populace grumbled. It was a delicate dance of diplomacy and authority, managing both the expectations of their superiors and the realities on the ground. As we continue to unravel the intricacies of ancient Egyptian society, it becomes clear that the bureaucracy was both a marvel of organization and a potential powder keg. The scribes and officials were pivotal players in this grand narrative, their roles as crucial as any pharaoh or priest. They were the architects of policy, the guardians of order, and at times, the unwitting architects of their own downfall. So, as we peel back the layers of this fascinating civilization, let's not forget the scribes and officials, the ones who worked quietly behind the scenes, their lives a testament to the power of the pen over the sword. In the annals of history, they may not have built pyramids or led armies, but their legacy is etched in the papyrus scrolls and stone inscriptions that continue to tell the story of ancient Egypt. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into this captivating world, uncovering more tales of intrigue and power, one hieroglyph at a time. So, from the diligent scribes and officials who kept the pharaoh's agenda on speed dial, let's pivot to the artisans and craftsmen, the unsung Michelangelos of ancient Egypt. These were the folks who took the pharaoh's grand visions and turned them into reality, chiseling away at limestone as if it were butter, creating everything from monumental statues to the intricate hieroglyphics that adorned temple walls. Yet, when it comes to the credit department, these skilled workers often got the short end of the stick, or chisel, as the case may be. Now, picture this. The grandeur of Karnak Temple, the imposing statues of Ramses II, or the exquisite detail of Tutankhamun's golden mask. These weren't the work of some divine miracle. They were crafted by skilled hands, often working in conditions that would make a sweatshop look like a day spa. We're talking about artisans and laborers who toiled in the sweltering heat, their compensation a far cry from the treasures they created. In fact, a skilled stone carver might have earned a daily wage of about 10 loaves of bread and a jug of beer, essentially enough to keep them upright and chiseling for another day. But let's not sugarcoat it. These artisans were the backbone of Egypt's aesthetic legacy, yet they were often treated as pawns in a game of divine monopoly. The social contract here was as solid as a pyramid block, yet as precarious as the sands beneath it. Craftsmen worked under a strict hierarchy, master craftsmen at the top, followed by apprentices and laborers. While the masters might enjoy a slightly cushier existence, perhaps even a modest home near the temple workshops, the apprentices often lived a life that was less marble and more rubble. Despite their crucial role, the social status of artisans was a mixed bag. They were respected for their skills, but rarely elevated to the upper echelons of society. Instead, they were stuck in a sort of limbo, hovering somewhere between the common laborer and the lower rungs of the scribble class. The irony: their work was literally set in stone, yet their names were seldom recorded in the annals of history. Talk about the original ghostwriters. But let's address the elephant, or should I say, the sphinx, in the room, the myth of the happy, contented artisan. While it's tempting to imagine these craftsmen whistling while they worked, the reality was far from a Disney movie. The ancient Egyptian equivalent of a labor union was more of a dinner-table negotiation. When conditions got too dire, they didn't just grumble into their beer, they took action. Case in point, the first recorded labor strike in history, which took place during the reign of Ramses III in the 12th century BCE. Picture the scene. Artisans working on the royal necropolis at Deir el-Medina stopped their work, downed their tools, and marched to the temple, demanding their overdue wages. The workers were supposed to receive monthly rations of grain, which had been inexplicably delayed. This was not just a minor inconvenience, it was a direct threat to their survival. The strike was a bold move, and it worked. The officials were forced to cough up the back pay, showcasing the power of collective action even in the shadow of the pyramids. But why was their work so critical? Beyond the obvious aesthetic contributions, artisans were the custodians of cultural memory. They captured the essence of Egyptian life, religion, and politics in their sculptures, paintings, and reliefs. They turned the abstract concepts of divine kingship into tangible forms, creating a narrative that reinforced the pharaoh's celestial status, and by extension, the stability of the state. In a world where the divine and the temporal were inextricably linked, the artisans were the bridge builders between the two realms. And yet, the artisans were often at the mercy of economics and politics. During periods of political upheaval or economic downturn, funding for monumental projects could dry up faster than a desert spring. This meant that artisans might find themselves out of work, their livelihoods as unpredictable as the Nile's floodwaters. It was a precarious existence, one that required navigating the shifting sands of economic fortunes and royal whims. But let's not leave out the role of innovation. While Egyptian art is famously consistent, the artisans were not just mindless replicators of tradition. They were innovators, adapting techniques and styles over time to reflect changing tastes and influences. The introduction of new tools, materials, and methods was often driven by the craftsmen themselves, eager to push the boundaries of their art. These were the original creative disruptors, working within a framework of tradition while subtly reshaping it. In terms of economic context, the artisans were integral to the wealth and prestige of Egypt. Their creations were not just decorative, they were potent symbols of power and continuity. The stunning reliefs and statues that adorned temples and tombs were as much about economic display as religious devotion. They showcased the wealth and resources of the state, a visual reminder of the pharaoh's ability to command the labor and materials necessary to create such wonders. The artisans and craftsmen of ancient Egypt were not just laborers. They were the architects of a cultural legacy that continues to captivate us today. Their work was a testament to human creativity and skill, a reminder that behind every great monument is a team of dedicated individuals whose contributions often go unrecognized. As we delve deeper into the story of ancient Egypt, let's remember the artisans who carved their legacy into the very stones of history, ensuring that their artistry would endure long after the sands had reclaimed their world. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the intricate tapestry of this remarkable civilization, unearthing more stories of innovation, resilience, and the human spirit. So, as we leave the artisans chiseling away in the background, let's turn our spotlight onto the real MVPs of ancient Egypt, the farmers and laborers. These folks were the unsung heroes who kept the granaries bursting and the pyramids rising. They were the foundation upon which the entire Egyptian economy was built, quite literally, in the case of those monumental tombs. Without them, the pharaoh's grandiose visions would have been nothing more than sandcastles in the desert. First, let's debunk a classic myth, the idea that Egypt's pyramids were built on the backs of slaves. This narrative has more in common with Hollywood than historical reality. While it's true that forced labor was part of the ancient world, the pyramids were largely constructed by seasonal workers. These laborers were predominantly farmers who, when the Nile flooded their fields, swapped plows for picks. In fact, evidence suggests they worked in rotating shifts, not unlike modern-day project teams. And yes, they were compensated for their toil, not with a cushy paycheck, but with rations of bread, beer, and fish. Let's face it, carbs and booze have been the backbone of the working class since time immemorial. Speaking of bread and beer, these weren't just dietary staples. They were the currency of daily life. A laborer's weekly wage, for example, might include around 10 loaves of bread and a few jugs of beer. This was sustenance, pure and simple, fueling the workforce that turned visions of grandeur into granite reality. And let's remember, those pyramids weren't just for show. They were eternal advertisements of a pharaoh's divine right to rule. Now, if you're picturing idyllic scenes of farmers peacefully tending their fields, think again. Life along the Nile was a precarious balancing act, dictated by the river's whims. When the annual inundation was generous, it turned arid soil into fertile land, a veritable Garden of Eden. But if the floodwaters were stingy or excessive, it was a recipe for disaster. Too little meant famine, too much, and fields turned to swamps. The farmers were at the mercy of nature, praying the gods would grant them just the right amount of water. It's a reminder that, despite all our advances, humanity is still pretty much at the whim of Mother Nature. In terms of work-life balance, let's just say the ancient Egyptians didn't have much in the way of me time. The agricultural calendar was relentless. Harvests to bring in, fields to plant, irrigation channels to maintain. It was back-breaking work with little respite. Yet it wasn't all toil and no reward. Festivals and religious holidays provided brief interludes of celebration, a time to honor the gods and let off steam. These were the original, long weekends, minus the barbecue and beer pong. But let's appreciate the social glue that held this society together. The laborers weren't just cogs in a machine. They were part of a community with a shared purpose. In a world without modern conveniences, cooperation wasn't just a virtue, it was a necessity. Whether building pyramids or gathering crops, these tasks required a collective effort, a testament to the power of teamwork long before it became a corporate buzzword. And while we're talking teamwork, let's not overlook the role of women in this ancient economy. Far from being confined to domestic spheres, women participated in farm work, managed households, and even ran businesses. They were integral to the fabric of daily life, balancing roles that were as crucial as they were diverse. Yet, like their male counterparts, their contributions often went unrecorded, their names eroded by time as surely as the Nile's banks. In this intricate dance of survival, the farmers and laborers were the bedrock of Egyptian prosperity. Their hard work ensured the granaries were stocked, sustaining not just their families, but the entire civilization. It was a delicate ecosystem, one where every plowed field and harvested crop reinforced the Pharaoh's divine mandate. As we wrap up our journey along the Nile, it's clear that the real story of ancient Egypt isn't just about towering pyramids or gilded sarcophagi. It's about the everyday people who built a legacy that endures to this day. Their lives, though often overlooked, were the threads that wove the tapestry of this remarkable civilization. They remind us that history is made not just by the powerful, but by the countless hands that turn the wheels of progress. So, as we let the sands of time settle, let's raise a metaphorical jug of beer to the farmers and laborers of ancient Egypt. Their legacy is etched not just in stone, but in the fertile soil along the Nile, a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. And maybe, just maybe, next time you marvel at a pyramid, you'll remember the unsung heroes who made it all possible. Cheers to them, the true architects of Egyptian grandeur. In the dusty annals of ancient Egypt, there exists a peculiar chapter that reads more like a teenage drama series than a royal saga. The life of Tutankhamun, the boy king. Born around 1341 BC, young Tut entered the world not in a golden chariot, but into a political tempest that would make even the most seasoned Game of Thrones character break out in a cold sweat. At the heart of this chaos was his father, Akhenaten, who wasn't content with just sitting on a throne. He had bigger fish to fry. Akhenaten decided to do a little home makeover, not with his palace, but with the entire religious landscape of Egypt. Traditionally, Egyptians were pretty comfortable with their pantheon of gods, each with its own quirks and specialties. But Akhenaten had a brainwave. Why not ditch the lot and focus on just one deity, Aten, the sun disk? It's like deciding to swap out an all-you-can-eat buffet for a single slice of bread. This attempt at religious reform didn't just ruffle a few feathers. It plucked the entire chicken. With temples abandoned and priests miffed, Akhenaten's monotheistic experiment set off a ripple of economic and social upheaval. Temples that were once bustling with offerings and tributes were now ghost towns, and the priests, used to their cushy temple jobs, were suddenly updating their resumes. As if that weren't enough drama for one reign, Akhenaten also moved the capital from the bustling city of Thebes to a brand new site known as Akhetaten, modern-day Amarna. The cost: a staggering amount of resources, labor, and no doubt a few royal IOUs. It was a bit like deciding to move the entire government to a new office building halfway across the country, while everyone was still getting used to the new company policy of worshipping only the CEO. All this chaos left the kingdom in a bit of a financial pickle. Enter Tutankhamun, the child king who was handed not only the double crown, but also the colossal task of cleaning up after Dad's party. He ascended the throne at the tender age of 8 or 9, a time when most kids are more concerned with losing their first tooth than managing a nation. Yet here he was, this young lad in the midst of a kingdom that had been turned upside down. The first order of business reversed the religious switcheroo. The boy king, under the guidance of his advisors, restored the old guards to their former glory and moved the capital back to Thebes. This was a strategic rewind that aimed to mend the rift with the priesthood and stabilize the economy. After all, the priests were Egypt's original influencers, and keeping them happy was crucial. Now, let's talk about the economics of being a pharaoh. It wasn't all pyramids and parades. Maintaining a palace was no small feat. Picture this: hundreds of servants, artisans, and officials buzzing around like bees in a hive, all on the pharaoh's payroll. And then there were the palatial expenses. The sheer opulence was enough to make even the wealthiest modern billionaire blush. The walls were lined with gold, the furniture was inlaid with ivory, and the wardrobes were bursting with linen fit for a king. Of course, all that glitters isn't just gold. It's a massive drain on the treasury too. In terms of hard numbers, some historians estimate that the cost of the royal court could easily consume about a third of the entire national income. That's like spending a third of your paycheck on your pets. Sure, they're cute and all, but they don't come cheap. The pharaoh's lifestyle was a testament to the wealth of Egypt, but it was also a constant balancing act, keeping the nobility, priests, and the military satisfied while ensuring the common folk didn't revolt. This was the world young Tutankhamun inherited, a land rich in history and culture, yet tangled in the complexities of political reform and economic strain. But what makes his story particularly captivating isn't just the staggering legacy he shouldered. It's the fact that he did it all before most of us have figured out how to parallel park. His reign, though short-lived, set the stage for the return to traditional values and stability, a fact that would only be fully appreciated centuries later when his tomb was discovered, revealing treasures that spoke of a kingdom's wealth and the incredible journey of its boy king as Tutankhamun settled into his throne, likely with his feet barely touching the ground. His early years as pharaoh were less about ruling and more about being a puppet in a game of ancient political chess. Picture this: a 9-year-old with the weight of an empire on his scrawny shoulders, surrounded by seasoned adults who probably viewed him as a delightful mix of cute and clueless. The real power brokers, Vizier Eye and General Hormheb, loomed large over the young king, pulling strings with the finesse of master puppeteers. Eye, the vizier, was a man with the uncanny ability to blend into the background while still holding the reins of authority. Think of him as the original behind-the-scenes operator, the person who knows where all the skeletons are buried, sometimes literally. He was a seasoned politician, having served under at least 2 previous pharaohs, and he had a knack for ensuring his influence remained firmly intact, regardless of who wore the crown. Then there was General Hormheb, the military muscle to Eye's political brain. He was essentially Egypt's top brass, a veteran of the battlefield whose loyalty was as formidable as his army. Hormheb wasn't just tough, he was also shrewd. He knew that the stability of Egypt depended on a strong military presence, and he ensured that the army remained a well-oiled machine, ready to defend or expand the empire as needed. Between the two of them, Eye and Hormheb created a power duo that could rival any modern political partnership. While Tutankhamun was nominally the king, Eye and Hormheb were the ones really calling the shots. They wisely guided the young pharaoh through the political minefields of his early reign, making decisions that would stabilize the kingdom. Under their stewardship, the boy king's reign saw the return of the traditional guards to their former places of worship, a move that was not just a spiritual revival, but a political masterstroke. By appeasing the priesthood, they effectively brought the influential religious class back into the fold, ensuring that their support, and the economic benefits that came with it, were firmly behind the throne. But let's not forget the unique challenges faced by a preteen pharaoh. International diplomacy, for example, wasn't exactly a typical topic in a 9-year-old's curriculum. Imagine being Tut, worrying about which envoy to send to negotiate with the Hittites, when all you really wanted to do was play with your chariot set. Yet, foreign relations were crucial, and Eye and Hormheb had to ensure that Egypt maintained its standing among neighboring powers. This often meant a delicate balance of marriage alliances, trade agreements, and the occasional show of force to keep the peace, or at least a semblance of it. In the royal court, Tutankhamun also had to contend with the sibling rivalry that comes with being part of a large, ambitious family. While the history books focus mainly on his reign, The palace was likely buzzing with relatives all vying for positions of power and influence. It was a bit like a high-stakes family reunion, where instead of arguing over who gets the last piece of cake, the stakes were control of the most powerful kingdom on earth. Despite these challenges, Tutankhamun's reign wasn't all doom and gloom. In fact, his short time as pharaoh saw a return to some level of economic normalcy. The reversal of his father's religious reforms helped reinvigorate the economy, as the re-establishment of traditional temples meant that the flow of offerings, grain, cattle, and yes, gold, resumed. This economic boost was crucial, as it allowed the kingdom to address its debts and fund the administrative machinery required to keep Egypt running smoothly. It's easy to romanticize Tutankhamun's reign, picturing a young king surrounded by opulence and splendor. But the reality was far more complex. While the tomb treasures discovered millennia later would reveal a kingdom of unimaginable wealth, the day-to-day responsibilities were a constant balancing act, ensuring that the nobility, priests, and military remained satisfied while keeping the commoners subdued was no small feat. It required a deft touch, something Tutankhamun, with his advisors at the helm, managed to achieve, at least for a time. As the years went by, Tutankhamun grew into his role, slowly but surely gaining a firmer grip on his kingdom. Yet his early years on the throne were a testament to the power dynamics that defined his reign. Ai and Hormheb may have been the real powers behind the throne, but it was the young king's name that sealed decrees and edicts. In a kingdom where appearances mattered as much as actions, this illusion of power was crucial. Tutankhamun's story, much like the elaborate hieroglyphs that adorn Egypt's ancient monuments, is a tapestry of intrigue, ambition, and the eternal human quest for power. It's a narrative that, while steeped in the sands of time, still resonates with the modern world, proving that the challenges of leadership, whether in the 14th century BC or today, are timeless. As Tutankhamun's story unfolds, it's clear that reversing his father's radical religious reforms was akin to untangling a particularly stubborn knot. Akhenaten's monotheistic revolution had not only been a theological earthquake, but a social and economic landslide that left Egypt's once stable empire teetering on the brink. Restoring the old gods wasn't just about appeasing a pantheon of deities. It was about mending the very fabric of society that had been torn apart by his father's sun-worshipping zeal. For starters, let's talk temples, the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a bustling city center, complete with priests, merchants, and a whole lot of incense. Under Akhenaten, many of these sacred spaces had been shut down or repurposed into Aten worship centers. This left a whole class of priests, artisans, and workers in the lurch, much like a corporate restructuring that suddenly leaves everyone scrambling for a new job. Tutankhamun's decision to rebuild and reopen these temples was as much an economic stimulus plan as it was a spiritual renaissance. It wasn't just about bringing back the gods, it was about bringing back the economy. Temples were major economic hubs, facilitating trade, storing surplus grains, and collecting taxes. They were the ancient equivalent of Wall Street, Starbucks, and the IRS all rolled into one. The political savvy behind reopening these temples was nothing short of Machiavellian. By restoring the priesthood to its former glory, Tutankhamun, and by extension, his puppet masters Ai and Hormheb, secured the loyalty of a powerful social class that had been sidelined under Akhenaten's regime. This wasn't just about spiritual peace of mind. It was about ensuring that those who controlled the narrative also controlled the purse strings. The priests, now back in their gilded robes and elaborate headpieces, resumed their roles as intermediaries between the people and the divine, a position that came with both spiritual prestige and tangible economic benefits. Economically speaking, this was a brilliant move. Temples were not just places of worship, but banks and storage facilities for goods and wealth. Reinstating the traditional gods meant the return of offerings, grain, cattle, gold, which translated into a flow of resources that could be used to stabilize the economy. Imagine being able to reboot a stalled economy by simply declaring that the gods are back in business. Tutankhamun's reign saw Egypt's coffers swell as the temples resumed their roles as centers of commerce and wealth distribution. But let's not get too carried away with the notion of a precocious boy king pulling the strings from behind the scenes. While the romantic image of a wise, young pharaoh might make for compelling bedtime stories, the truth is that Tutankhamun, barely out of his teens, was more like a figurehead on a ship steered by seasoned sailors. The real power lay with Ai and Hormheb, who were adept at navigating the troubled waters of court politics. They were the ones making the strategic moves that would see Egypt regain its footing. Tutankhamun's role was largely ceremonial, a living symbol of continuity and tradition in a world desperate for stability. And then there's the myth of Tutankhamun's divine wisdom, a tale as tall as a pyramid. The idea that a teenager could possess the insight and foresight to guide a nation through such tumultuous times is as plausible as finding a Starbucks in the desert. Tutankhamun's youth and inexperience meant he relied heavily on his advisors, who had their own agendas. This wasn't a case of a young genius leading his people through sheer charisma and intellect. It was more about keeping up appearances while the real decisions were made behind closed doors. Still, the boy king's reign was not without its merits. The reversal of Akhenaten's policies smoothed over ruffled feathers, both divine and secular. The priesthood, reinstated and re-empowered, became a stabilizing force, supporting the throne in exchange for restored status and influence. This move also helped reinvigorate trade networks, as temple offerings and religious festivals attracted merchants and goods from across the known world. It was a win-win situation, provided you ignored the fact that Tutankhamun was more of a spectator than a strategist. Beyond the borders of Egypt, the restoration of traditional worship helped mend relations with foreign powers. Akhenaten's religious upheaval hadn't won Egypt any friends on the international stage. Neighboring rulers, baffled by the religious shift, had been wary of dealing with a kingdom that seemed to have lost its cultural compass. With the old guards reinstated, Tutankhamun's Egypt appeared more predictable and therefore more trustworthy. Diplomatic channels reopened, and trade agreements that had been on ice began to thaw, bringing much-needed resources and stability back to the empire. But let's not sugarcoat it. This return to the old ways wasn't without its challenges. The infrastructural demands of rebuilding temples and re-establishing the priesthood required manpower and resources that could have been used elsewhere. The labor force, already stretched thin from the grandiose projects of previous reigns, was tasked with erecting new monuments and refurbishing abandoned ones. It was a monumental undertaking, one that required not just resources, but also a delicate balancing act to keep the population from noticing the strain. Yet, the narrative of a young king single-handedly restoring order with divine wisdom is more fiction than fact. Tutankhamun's reign, while marked by significant reforms, was largely orchestrated by those around him. The real story is one of political acumen, strategic maneuvering, and the power of restoration in a world that had been turned upside down. As for Tutankhamun himself, his legacy would be sealed not by his policies or his prowess, but by the treasures found in his tomb, a testament to an empire that had weathered the storm and emerged, if not unscathed, at least intact. While the boy king may have been more of a pawn than a player, the decisions made during his reign had far-reaching implications for Egypt's future. The restoration of the old guards set the stage for a return to traditional values that would define the empire for generations. And while Tutankhamun might not have been the mastermind behind these changes, his reign serves as a reminder of the complexities of power and the enduring allure of a story that, much like the pyramids, stands the test of time. So, while the myths of divine wisdom and a precocious ruler make for a good yarn, it's the reality of political strategy, economic necessity, and social stability that truly defines Tutankhamun's reign. It's a story of a kingdom finding its way back to its roots, even if the young king himself was more of a bystander than a leader. And as we delve deeper into the tale of the boy king, it becomes clear that his legacy is less about the man himself and more about the world he left behind, a world that would continue to fascinate and inspire long after his time in the spotlight had faded. As we pivot from the glittering facade of Tutankhamun's reign to the shadows surrounding his untimely demise, it's like swapping a comedy for a whodunit. The boy king's death at around 19 years old is a real-life mystery that's left Egyptologists scratching their heads and conspiracy theorists rubbing their hands with glee. Was it foul play, a tragic accident, or just the unfortunate culmination of a life lived too fast and too young? Grab your magnifying glass, dear Watson, because we're diving into the enigma of Tut's final days. Let's start with the facts, or at least what we think are the facts. Tutankhamun shuffled off this mortal coil around 1323 BC, but the cause of his death remains as murky as the Nile on a stormy day. One popular theory suggests a chariot accident. Picture this: a royal joyride gone wrong, with Tutankhamun racing through the desert, wind in his hair, before an untimely collision with the ancient equivalent of a pothole. The result: a broken leg and a nasty infection that modern antibiotics could have cleared up faster than you can say tetracycline. But back then, it was a one-way ticket to the afterlife. Then there's the assassination theory, which has all the makings of a palace intrigue thriller. Some suggest Tutankhamun's death was orchestrated by those who stood to gain from his absence. Cough, vizier eye, cough. After all, I didn't waste much time before slipping into the pharaonic sandals, but evidence supporting this theory is as flimsy as a papyrus in a sandstorm. Sure, there's talk of a possible blow to the back of the head, but modern CT scans suggest it might just be post-mortem damage. Still, if you're looking for a villain in this tale, eye makes for a tempting suspect. But let's not overlook the mundane possibility that Tutankhamun simply succumbed to the pitfalls of ancient Egyptian life. Malaria, for instance, was as common as sand, and DNA tests on Tut's mummified remains have shown signs of the parasite. Couple that with a weakened immune system, possibly due to inbreeding, thanks, royal family tree, and you've got a recipe for a tragic, but not entirely unexpected demise. It's a sobering reminder that, even in a world of golden thrones and opulent banquets, nature doesn't play favorites. Now, onto the tomb. The piece de resistance of Tutankhamun's posthumous fame. Discovered in 1922 by Howard Carter, it's become the stuff of legend, largely because it was one of the few royal tombs found intact. The treasures within were so dazzling they'd make a magpie's head spin. Gold death mask, check. Canopic jars, check. Chariots, thrones, and enough jewelry to make Tiffany's look like a garage sale, check, check, and check. But let's not forget the more peculiar items, like those infamous golden sandals. Yes, because nothing says eternal rest, like bling for your feet. The cost of outfitting Tutankhamun for the afterlife would have been astronomical. We're talking about over 5,000 objects crammed into a tomb no bigger than your average studio apartment. This wasn't just about ensuring the king had everything needed for the next world. It was a statement of wealth and power that screamed, "Look at me. I may be dead, but I'm still the king." Estimates suggest the preparation and construction of such a tomb could have consumed a small nation's GDP. And for what? A glorified storage unit that, despite its grandeur, was hastily finished, likely due to Tut's sudden departure from the land of the living. You might wonder why Tutankhamun, a relatively minor pharaoh, went to such lengths for his burial. The answer lies in the ancient Egyptian belief in the afterlife, where the dead lived on in a world that was a mirror image of the one they left behind. To ensure a smooth transition, pharaohs were buried with all the comforts they'd need, from food and clothing to board games and booze. Yes, even kings needed a little R&R in the afterlife. But beyond the glittering allure of the tomb lies a more practical question. How did the economy handle the expense of a royal funeral? Tutankhamun's burial was a significant drain on resources, yet it was seen as an essential investment in both the king's eternal journey and the legitimacy of the ruling class. It was a message to the living, as much as the dead, that the pharaoh's divine status transcended mortality. The lavishness of the tomb was a political statement, reinforcing the pharaoh's connection to the gods and reassuring the populace that all was well under the sun god's watchful eye. Despite all this, Tutankhamun's tomb wasn't the grandest or most elaborate in the Valley of the Kings. His premature death meant that his final resting place was a scaled-down version of the grand mausoleums intended for longer-reigning pharaohs. It's a bit like expecting to retire in a mansion and ending up in a cozy cottage. Yet the tomb's compact size was its salvation. Buried beneath layers of debris from subsequent tombs, it was spared the looting that befell grander sepulchres. So, while the young king might not have been a mover and shaker in life, his death has certainly kept the world buzzing. The mysteries of his demise, coupled with the treasures of his tomb, have cemented Tutankhamun's place in history. But as we marvel at the golden mask and the opulent artifacts, it's worth remembering the reality behind the myth. A life cut short, a kingdom left in the hands of power players, and a legacy that would be defined not by his deeds, but by his death. And thus, the enigma of Tutankhamun's untimely end and the grandeur of his afterlife preparations continue to captivate us. As we ponder the boy king's fate, it's clear that his story is far from over, a tantalizing blend of history, intrigue, and the timeless allure of a mystery unsolved. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the legacy of the boy pharaoh, exploring the ripples of his life and death that echo through the ages. But the saga of Tutankhamun's legacy takes another twist with the discovery of his tomb in 1922, courtesy of one tenacious Brit, Howard Carter. Picture Carter, a man with the persistence of a terrier and the patience of a saint, finally striking gold after years of fruitless digging in the Valley of the Kings. He wasn't just unearthing artifacts. He was opening a portal to a bygone era, a time capsule sealed tighter than an ancient curse. And speaking of curses, enter the legend of the Curse of the Pharaohs, a tale that's been spun into countless horror flicks and spine-tingling novels. The truth, much less mystical, but we'll get to that in a bit. First, let's appreciate the sheer spectacle of Carter's discovery. Imagine him peering into the tomb, lantern in hand, and uttering the now famous words, "Yes, wonderful things." What he saw was an Aladdin's cave of treasures that had lain undisturbed for over 3,000 years. Sheer opulence within, golden beds, ornate chariots, and Tutankhamun's iconic death mask was staggering. This wasn't just a tomb, it was a statement, a postcard from the past saying, "Wish you were here, but also I'm still kind of a big deal." The financial implications of this discovery were massive. While Tutankhamun had been something of a historical footnote, a blip in the grand timeline of pharaohs, the treasures in his tomb catapulted him to posthumous stardom. Suddenly, Egyptology was the new black. Museums worldwide scrambled to get their hands on anything remotely related to the boy king, fueling a frenzy that would make even the most seasoned PR agent envious. This was the Roaring Twenties, and as jazz bands played and flappers danced, the treasures of Tutankhamun were busy sparking an Egyptomania that saw everything from fashion to architecture influenced by ancient Egyptian motifs. Now, let's debunk that infamous curse. The curse supposedly struck down anyone who dared disturb the pharaoh's rest, starting with Lord Carnarvon, Carter's patron, who died shortly after the tomb was opened. Spooky, right? But a closer look reveals a less dramatic truth. Lord Carnarvon succumbed to an infected mosquito bite, hardly the stuff of supernatural revenge. And what about the other supposed victims of the curse? Well, Carter himself lived until 1939, a good 17 years post-discovery. If Tutankhamun was doling out curses, he was taking his sweet time about it. The curse myth, while enchanting in its own right, was largely a product of sensationalist journalism and the public's appetite for the mysterious. The reality, the Valley of the Kings is a harsh environment with heat, sand, and critters that would make anyone's health insurance premiums skyrocket, not to mention the bacteria and mold spores that had been festering in those sealed chambers, just waiting to wreak havoc on unsuspecting explorers. So, while the Curse of the Pharaohs makes for a great bedtime story, it's more likely that the real culprit was nature's own brand of chaos. But let's shift gears to Tutankhamun's lasting impact. Despite his brief and relatively unremarkable reign, his legacy is anything but forgettable. The treasures of his tomb provided an unprecedented insight into the art, culture, and economy of ancient Egypt. His burial items weren't just symbols of wealth. They were a testament to the intricate craftsmanship and social hierarchy of the time. Each artifact tells a story of a civilization that was both advanced and deeply spiritual, a society that saw death not as an end, but as a continuation of life in another realm. Economically, the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb was like hitting the jackpot. It drew tourists like moths to a flame, bringing a much-needed economic boost to Egypt's tourism industry. Museums hosting exhibitions of the tomb's artifacts saw record numbers of visitors. Each ticket sold a contribution to the burgeoning fascination with ancient Egypt. Tutankhamun had unwittingly become a brand ambassador for Egyptology, a role that would cement his place in history more firmly than any campaign he could have launched in life. Yet, beyond the glitz and glamour, Tutankhamun's story is a poignant reminder of the fleeting nature of power and the enduring nature of legacy. Here was a boy who, despite the odds, managed to leave an indelible mark on the world, not through his deeds, but through the sheer accident of his preserved tomb. His life may have been short, and his reign overshadowed by powerful advisors, but his afterlife has been a resounding triumph. In a world obsessed with the ephemeral, his story is a testament to the timeless allure of history. In the end, Tutankhamun's tale is both a cautionary and celebratory one. It warns of the dangers of romanticizing the past while celebrating the rich tapestry of history that continues to captivate us. His legacy is a mosaic of myth and reality, a blend of ancient grandeur and modern fascination that reminds us of the complexities of human nature and the enduring quest for immortality. As we close the book on Tutankhamun, let's raise a metaphorical glass to the boy king who, against all odds, achieved the immortality that even the most ambitious pharaohs could only dream of. Cheers, Tutankhamun, you've earned it.